Reading of the life of our Holy Father John the Almsgiver, Patriarch of Alexandria. Holy Father bless. Amen. John, the great servant of God and his faithful high priest, who was named after almsgiving and received that exceptional and glorious title from his exceeding goodness, which took Christ for its model. This John, I say, invites us to the present banquet of praise, and as dainty and free fare, he sets before us for our common feast most pleasing tales of his achievements and his triumphs. And every soul that delights in instruction will revel and find joy in them, and in its love for God it will be aroused by a sacred passion to pious imitation. And the Lord of glory will be signally glorified, for he is always glorified in his own servants, and those that glorify him he glorifies splendidly in return. Come then, let us best as we may begin our story. It cannot be complete, but we shall be graciously guided towards the end which we have set before us by John's merciful cooperation and intercession. This renowned light of the Church and great father among saints was the noble offspring and precious nursling of the island of the Cyprians, and was descended not from ignoble or ordinary ancestors, but from those of an illustrious family and of brilliant renown. For John's father, Epiphanius by name, did so many conspicuous and remarkable things in his life, in accordance, we may say, with his name, that he was chosen by the rulers of that time to be entrusted with the reins of government in the island of the Cyprians. And we may, I think, reasonably suppose that his wife, the mother of our wonderful John, had, like her husband, her share of good fortune and distinction. This noble lad was given a generous education by his noble parents, and was brought up in the fear of the Lord. As he grew in age, he developed in body and progressed in spirit, until he was joined to a wife in the partnership of lawful wedlock, not, however, by his own wish, but through the prayers of our Holy Father. The Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us. Amen. Not, however, by his own wish, but in obedience to his father's authority did he take upon himself the yoke of marriage. Nor was it so much that he yielded readily, but rather that he was forced thereto by constraint. And in his love of purity, even after assuming the bonds of marriage, he gave a proof of his great passion for the unmarried state, for accepting the marriage contract in name only, and treating it as but a form. In his love for continence, he abstained from a considerable time from intercourse with his wife. Finally, his father-in-law noticed what was happening, became very angry, and threatened to brand with guilt the purpose of his guiltless son-in-law. At this, the great-hearted man yielded, for in all things he was ready to make concessions, and earnestly strove to give offense to none. He therefore went so far as to submit himself to the lawful intercourse of married life. From this intercourse he allowed himself even to beget children, of whom he had a bountiful crop, becoming the father of sons according to the law of nature. These all departed this life while they were still in the flower of their age, and his wife too met her end soon afterwards. He had now gained complete freedom from all worldly burdens and anxieties, and gave himself up wholly and entirely without any other thought than how to please the Lord, and, like the great apostle, to become all things to all men, and not to seek his own profit only, but the profit of many, that they might have a prosperous course. And indeed he was always on all occasions amiable to all, advising, encouraging, assisting, acting as peacemaker, doing a kindness, reconciling, and ever anxiously striving to display his love for the highest virtue in all its forms. And by this conduct, John became everywhere very famous, and at the same time dearly beloved, not only by the subjects of the empire and by private individuals, but even by the emperors themselves and by the nobles and governors. Thus, under strong pressure by the Emperor Heraclius, and largely through the Council of Nicetas, who at that time had been raised to the rank of patrician and shared in the government of the empire, he was also the adopted brother of the blessed man, and further with the approval of the whole body of the Alexandrians, he was raised to the high priestly throne as Patriarch. With his mind filled by the inspiration of the divine Spirit, John first of all suppressed the blasphemous addition, namely the innovation in the Trisagion, which Peter, nicknamed the Fuller, in his profane babbling had recited, daring impiously to say, "Holy immortal, thou who wast crucified for us." For when John by divine decree received into his hands the reins of the high priesthood, he found only 7 churches maintaining the services of the Orthodox liturgy, and by much diligence he succeeded in increasing the number to 70. And in all these he authorized the celebration of the Immaculate Oblation. He absolutely refused to receive presents or money or any kind of gift whatsoever, not only as a fee for ordination, but also on any other pretext or excuse, whether the matter were great or small, for he ever kept in mind the words of the writer of Proverbs, who says, "He that is greedy of gain destroys himself, but he that hateth taking gifts shall live." Moreover, from all those who were seeking ordination at his hands, whether as bishops or priests, he demanded a written declaration in order to safeguard the Orthodox faith and to secure the observance of all the ordinances set forth in the canons. With regard to the decisions concerning ordinations and the testing of candidates, he was very scrupulous that once when the emperor sent to him about a certain monk who feigned great piety, asking John to ordain him bishop, he examined the facts with care, and recognizing that the monk was unworthy of the priesthood, he confined him to one of the monasteries, bidding him remain there quietly. The monk escaped soon afterwards, and reported the whole matter to the emperor, but John was not afraid, nor did he take any account of the emperor's order. He sent the monk empty away, telling him to return to him who had sent him. The priests who abjured their heresy and gave written declarations of their repentance, confessing the doctrines of the Orthodox faith, accepting the 4 holy ecumenical councils, and anathematizing all the heresies and the heresiarchs, were willingly received by John, who made them members of the Catholic Church. At that time, the Persian armies invaded and laid waste the whole country of the Syrians, and the inhabitants of all the towns there came in great numbers with bishops and other clergy and governors, and sought refuge in Alexandria. In the greatness of his mind and the generosity of his purpose, he supported them all liberally, supplying most abundantly each one's necessities. When he learnt that some of the bishops staying in Alexandria were in need, he summoned the richer members amongst the leading clergy, and when he had brought them together, he exhorted them with many counsels, and then laid down that they all, and he himself first of all, should pay 1 pound of gold a year to their poverty-stricken colleagues. He made a similar arrangement for the needy priests and deacons and the rest of the clergy of the church, freely granting to each and every rank a certain sum of gold yearly corresponding to the particular labor of his own station, so that his wants might be satisfied. In addition to this, he built a great many poorhouses and hostels for strangers, and he decreed that all the corn and all the necessary expenditure for the feeding of their inmates should be paid for from the revenues of the church. Once, when a severe famine was oppressing the city, and the holy man's stewards were, as usual, ceaselessly distributing money or some small gift to the needy, some destitute women, overcome with hunger, and but lately risen from childbed, were obliged to hasten to receive help from the distributors, while they were still in the grip of abdominal pains, deadly pale, suffering grievously. When the wondrous man was told of this, he built 7 lying-in hospitals in different parts of the city, ordered 40 beds to be kept ready in each, and arranged that every woman should rest quietly in these for 7 full days after her confinement, and then receive the third of a numisma and go home. It was not only for those in bodily need that he showed care, but he took special forethought for the salvation of those suffering from spiritual hunger. For instance, there was a lake in Alexandria called Mariotis, in which a great quantity of papyrus grew, and the inhabitants of that district had been in the habit of cutting it down and using it as fuel instead of wood. And the boys, whose work it was to cut down the papyrus, together with the men dwelling there, practiced the vice of sodomy unrestrainedly, and they had no house of prayer, no priest at all. They never heard the scriptures, nor partook of the divine mysteries. When the inspired patriarch heard of these illegal doings and of this pollution, he ordered the boys to be brought away from the place, and he built houses of prayer for its inhabitants, and set apart certain priests whom he appointed to minister to them and to teach them. After Razmiozan, the governor, or rather the general-in-chief of Khosroes, king of the Persians, had demolished all the holy places of Jerusalem, the news of this wickedness came to the ears of the thrice-blessed patriarch. When he heard of this horrible insolence and learned that all the holy things had been committed to the flames, then, just as though he had been an inhabitant of the places which had suffered, thus he sat down and made lament. He mourned for their desolation, not merely for 1 or 2 days, or 10 or 20, or even twice as many, but for a whole year. Wailing and groaning bitterly, he strove by his lamentations to outdo Jeremiah, who of old lamented over the capture of this same city, Jerusalem. And this lamentation he did not compose, as it were, without careful thought, leaving it to be forgotten, but he is said to have committed it to writing. And on receiving the news of this disaster, he sent a man dearly loved of God, Stylippus by name, and at that time in charge of the monasteries of the Anathon, to view the destruction of the holy places in Jerusalem. And by his hands he sent a large sum of money and an abundance of corn, wine, oil, and pulse, also garments for laymen and for monks, and for the sick various kinds of eatables, and finally a great many beasts of burden for the distribution of these necessaries. He not only took much thought for those who had been captured in the towns, but he took measures with great care for those from the monasteries who had suffered a similar fate, and especially for the women from the convents. A number of the latter had been done to death by the Persians, and about 1,000 of the nuns were captured, so John sent a large sum of money to ransom them, and then he restored them all, settling them in convents. The Persian governors heard of John's surpassing liberality and boundless sympathy, for certainly he was most appropriately named the almsgiver, and therefore they were very eager to see him, for even an enemy respects a man's virtue, and they offered money to Dion, who was governor at that time, if he would make it possible for them to see him. Besides all this, John sent Theodore, Bishop of Amathus, to rescue those who had been taken prisoners by the Medianians, and with him Anastasius, abbot of the Mount of the great Anthony, and Gregory, Bishop of Rhinocorura. By their help he effected the rescue of very many captives, both men and women, whom he redeemed by paying a large sum of gold. But it was not only in the distribution of money and the ransoming of captives that he showed the generosity of his disposition, but also in the matter of his simple fare, for he had no hesitation in showing that his own humble style of living was to buy cheaply and to be content with little. One day in the large church of the great martyr Minos, he took a cup of wine in his hand, and when he noticed its bouquet and pleasant taste, he asked the steward where it had been bought and for how much.
Agreed.
The steward replied that the wine had been brought from Palestine and purchased at a very high price. So John refused to drink it, saying, "Humble John does not drink such fragrant and excellent wine, but to it so high a price. Pour me out rather some Meroitic wine, for its taste is nothing to boast of, and its price is low." A certain John at that time, bishop of the town of Tiberias, escaped the barbaric invasion of the Persians, fled for refuge to the great city of the Alexandrians, and there reached the end of his life. He used to wear in his breast a gold cross, inside which was a portion of the precious cross, and this he bequeathed to his heir. Now John longed to possess this, and asked the man to take double its price and give him what he desired. The man took the sum agreed upon, then changed the pectoral cross and gave the patriarch another in place of it. Afterwards, the rascal at dead of night saw a vision of angels calling him to account and questioning him and using terrible threats to him, and saying that unless he gave the just patriarch the precious bit of wood which he had inherited, he should suffer most grievous ills and end his life in utter misery. So he did this at once and asked forgiveness for the crafty theft. Some of the clergy had deserted their own towns owing to the invasions of the barbarians, and had come to Alexandria and had no expectation of ever returning to their native towns. These John accepted and enrolled in the church. As these men had no shepherds, he did not insist on their supplying letters of introduction, but he took written declarations from them to prove their confession of the Orthodox faith and their observance of the ecclesiastical canons. On hearing of the wholesale devastation of the Roman realm by the Persians, John decided to go to the emperor and open negotiations for peace. But although he had drawn up his farewell speech and read it to all, the people of the city would not allow him to leave. After the Persian armies had utterly laid waste the whole of Syria, Phoenicia, and Arabia, and various cities besides, these sinners threatened to take even Alexandria itself. And then the holy man, having found out by God's help that a murderous plot was being hatched against him, sailed away to his native country, Cyprus. Now a general, one Aspagoras by name, had been sent to Constantia in Cyprus, but had not been admitted by the town. So he prepared himself for war against its citizens, and they on their side were arming themselves against him. And they were just on the point of engaging in this slaughter of each other, when the all-admirable John, the disciple of the God of peace, intervened, and induced both parties to seek reconciliation, and succeeded in bringing them to terms. John once received relics from Jerusalem of Stephen, the first martyr, and of James, the brother of our Lord. So he built a chapel in the name of this first great martyr, and having made a list of all his belongings, he generously dedicated them to this chapel. Isaac, who was general at that time, betrayed the city of the Alexandrians to the Persians, and then fled for refuge to Cyprus. There he found the most holy Patriarch and formed a murderous intrigue against him, intending to kill him on the Monday before Palm Sunday. The divine man was informed of this and therefore stayed at home and received nobody, and thus by God's providence he was miraculously saved from this deadly attack. But the author of this plot, the miserable Isaac, by the just judgment of the unsleeping providence of God, was savagely set upon by some men and murdered on the very day on which he had planned death against the righteous Patriarch. John, the all-holy Patriarch, when he had arrived at Constantia, paid reverent worship to the relics of the saints there, namely Barnabas, the all-praiseworthy apostle, and Epiphanius, the great miracle worker, and afterwards went on to Emathus, and it was from there that he departed to be with his beloved Lord. And a supplement to the life of John the Almsgiver, our saintly father and Archbishop of Alexandria, written by Leontius, Bishop of Neapolis, in the island of Cyprus. Our purpose in writing this biography of the glorious Patriarch is the same as that of the earnest and holy men who wrote before me, and that is that from the study of his life all may gain spiritual profit and a desire to imitate his piety, and that men may ascribe glory to and magnificence to the holy and worshipful Trinity, which in this, as in all things, from generation to generation, exhibits its own luminaries to give light to those that sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, which is caused by sin. Then again, my Christ-loving readers, we completely fail to admire the men of our own generation, even if they have lived lives well-pleasing unto God, but rather by the devil's instigation, we often say to each other that in former times the lawlessness of men was not so multiplied, but now, the devil whispers, it is as the Holy Scripture foretold, because lawlessness has been multiplied, the love of many shall wax cold. Hence we grow feeble in virtue. This is the second reason for my undertaking this incomplete story of the saint's life, to prove that even nowadays those who desire it and carry out their purpose by force have shown themselves more excellent than we, and have trodden the straight and narrow path, and closed the mouth of those who utter unrighteous and soul-destroying thoughts. The others who before us wrote about this wonderful man and high priest, John, have composed their works in a beautiful and lofty style, for they were powerful in word and deed. I mean John and Sophronius, men who feared God and loved virtue, true champions of piety. And yet, although they won so high a reputation, even they failed to tell all about this man's virtue, and were in the same case as industrious husbandmen. They, when gathering in the crop of a goodly and fruitful vineyard, even without wishing it, will be sure to leave something from the blessing of the harvest to the poor who follow in their footsteps, and glean the grapes remaining on the vines. And of such gleaners we are indeed the least. And although all these holy men strove in their zeal for God with all their powers to gather in the produce of this fruitful olive tree, for indeed the olives on it were very rich, since it was planted in the house of God, as says the psalmist David, yet the greater part of the fruit of the tree escaped their eye. This was by the Lord's dispensation, who was willing to accept also our modest and cold-hearted desire, just as he accepted the widow's 2 mites. I, all unworthy as I am, came up to Alexandria to revere the holy and victorious martyrs Cyrus and John, and to enjoy their succor. And while I was in Alexandria, I met with certain pious Christian men, and as we were conversing about biblical and other edifying narratives, a stranger came up to us asking alms. For, said he, I have only just been rescued from my captivity under the Persians. Now it chanced that not one of us sitting there had either a large coin or even any small change with us. The servant of one of our company happened to be with his master. He was a hot water carrier at the baths who received only 3 numismata a year and had a wife and 2 children. When the beggar was going away, this man followed him quietly, took off a small silver cross he was wearing, and gave it to him, saying that besides that, he had only a 6pence in the world. Thus, by chance, or rather through the good purpose of the all-wise God, I was privileged to see what he did, and deeply moved, I forthwith recounted it to the man sitting next to me, one Minos by name, a virtuous, God-fearing man, who was also treasurer of the Most Holy Church in the time of the glorious and ever-blessed Patriarch John. He, seeing me astonished and full of praise for the man who had done this deed of charity, said to me, "Do not be surprised, for he practices that virtue by tradition and from instruction." On my replying, "How so? For pity's sake enlighten me," he answered, "He was servant to our most saintly, thrice-blessed Patriarch John, and like a true son he has inherited his father's virtue. For the holy man once said to him, 'Humble Zacharias, be charitable, for then you have a promise from God through me, a miserable sinner, that neither during my lifetime nor after my death will God desert you.' And this promise he keeps to the present day, for God sends him many blessings, and of these he spends nothing save that which he distributes forthwith to the poor, almost reducing his own household to want. Men have often heard him say to God in exultation, 'Verily, verily, let us see who surpasses the other, thou in sending blessings, or I in scattering them. For thou, O Lord, art clearly the source of our riches and the giver of our livelihood.' And it sometimes happens that he has nothing to give at the moment to a beggar, and then in his distress he says to some merchant or tradesman, 'Give me a crown, and I will work for you for a month or 2 as you wish, because my folk at home are very hungry.' And when he gets it, he gives it to the poor man and begs him not to tell anyone." Minos, that pious man, observing that I listened to him as if to the gospel, said to me with emotion, "Are you amazed at this, sir? What would you think, then, if you had met the sainted patriarch?" "What," said I, "is there anything I would rather have seen?" Then he replied, "By the grace of God, he made me a priest and treasurer to the Most Holy Church, and believe me, I have seen him do things which are almost supernatural. And if you will deign to honor us today with your presence, I will relate to you the glorious deeds which I have beheld him do with my own eyes." At these words I took him by the hand and helped him to rise, and he led me to his God-guarded house. But when he wanted us to sit down to table at once, I said to him, "It is not right, master, to neglect the soul's nourishment and to satisfy the body before the soul. Let us rather first partake of the food which perisheth not, and afterwards attend to the wants of the body." Then he began to give a truthful account of the holy man's life. He said, "His first and most remarkable achievement is that he never at any time used an oath. I at once asked for ink and paper and wrote down all he said, word for word." After John had been elected and was to be enthroned in the Christ-loving capital of Alexandria, most certainly by the will of God, and not from men, neither through man, this was the first glorious deed and victory which he showed forth to all men. He immediately summoned the treasurers and the official who was styled the guardian of the peace, and said to them in the hearing of all in the Patriarch's council chamber, "It is not right, brethren, that we should consider anyone in preference to Christ." The whole assembly which had gathered together was deeply moved at his words, and agreed thereto. And then the holy man continued, "Go therefore through the whole city, please, and make a list of all my masters, down to the last." But his hearers could not imagine who these could be, and besought him to tell them, as they were astonished that any could possibly be masters of the Patriarch. And he opened his angelic mouth again and said, "Those whom you call poor and beggars, these I proclaim my masters and helpers, for they and they only are really able to help us and bestow upon us the kingdom of heaven." The imitator of Christ saw that this command was carried out with all speed, and he then bade them apportion a daily sum to be paid by his private treasurer, sufficient for the needs of these poor, and they were more than 7,000 and a half. Then, like a true shepherd and no hireling, he went with his sacred flock and the concourse of saintly bishops to the Holy Church, and was enthroned by the will of God. And there is another good deed which it would not be right to overlook amongst his achievements. For on the morrow he again sent through the whole city his God-loving treasurers and the ushers, and with them those who were entrusted with the civil administration of the city, and insisted that it should not be lawful to use at will different measures or scales, whether great or small, throughout the city, but that everything should be brought and sold according to a single standard and weight, whether the modius or artaba. He sent out an edict signed by his own hand throughout the whole neighborhood, worded as follows: John, the humble servant and the least of all servants of our Lord Jesus Christ, to all whose lot it is to be shepherded under our poverty by the same Lord our God. The inspired and blessed Apostle Paul gave this command and law to all through Christ who spoke in him: Obey them that have the rule over you, and submit to them, for they watch in behalf of our souls, as they that shall give account. I, who am nothing, am convinced that in obedience to these godly words you will receive our requests as from God and not from man. Therefore, knowing this, I exhort you, beloved, since God hates a large and a small balance, as the Holy Scripture says, never to allow such a transgression of law to be seen anywhere amongst you. But if, after the promulgation of this our edict, subscribed by us, anyone shall be proved to have rendered himself open to such a charge, he shall hand over all his possessions to the needy, whether he will or no, and receive no compensation. We were anxious to insert this story about his public edict, as we considered it most worthy of record. And some persons once informed this saint of godly wisdom that the stewards of his church, being corrupted by bribes, were become respecters of persons in their administration of justice. Thereupon he convoked them without delay, and without bringing any charge against them, he increased the salaries they had received hitherto, and at the same time made it an inflexible rule that they should never take a gift from anyone whatsoever. For, said he, fire shall consume the houses of the receivers of bribes. Consequently, by God's grace, their households from that time on prospered so exceedingly that some of them did not take their additional pay. On another occasion, the thrice blessed found out that some who had been wronged by those who had gone to law with them and wished to appeal to the Patriarch were prevented from so doing through fear of the ushers and the disciplinary officials and the rest of his retinue. So he devised the following plan, which was pleasing unto God. Every Wednesday and Friday he had a seat and 2 stools placed in the open in front of the church, and there he sat in company with a few virtuous men, or with the gospel in his hands, and allowed no member of his great retinue to approach him except one disciplinary official. He was anxious to give confidence and ready access to those who wished to consult him, and on their behalf he caused justice to be done immediately by the disciplinary officials, and he used to order the latter not to touch food until they had settled the matter. And he said so that all could hear, if we men have confidence that we can at any time enter into God's house with our petitions and make our requests known to the unapproachable, the Lord of all creation, and we are impatient for our prayer to be granted, and we importune him not to delay, nay, rather we at once cry in the words of the prophet, but thy tender mercy speedily prevent us, O Lord. Is it not then our duty to fulfill the requests of our fellow servants with all speed, remembering the words of our Lord, with what measure ye mete it shall be measured unto you again, and those of the prophet, as thou hast done, so be it done unto thee. One day the admirable man went as usual, and sat in his accustomed place until the 5th hour, and as nobody came to him, he returned all tearful and cast down. No one ventured to ask the reason of his despondency, until the Saint Sophronius, who chanced to be present, said to him in private, What is the cause, God-guarded master, of this melancholy which is weighing down your holy soul, and has cast us all into sudden dismay? John answered in his meek voice, Today, for the first time, humble John did not get any wages from anyone, and this was the first time that he could not offer anything to Christ on behalf of his countless sins. Then, inspired by God, Sophronius replied to the hierarch, for he had once guessed the reason of the Patriarch's sorrow, Today you ought rather to rejoice and be delighted, most blessed Master, for you are truly blessed if you have brought such peace to the flock entrusted to you, that nobody has a quarrel or dispute with his neighbor, but they are like the angels, free from enmity and from lawsuits. When the truly meek shepherd felt satisfied that Sophronius had spoken the truth, he lifted his eyes to heaven and said, I thank thee, O God, who hast allowed me, unworthy as I am, to be called thy priest, and though the least of men and a sinner, to be the shepherd of a reasonable flock. Then he immediately laid aside all his despondency, and much joy was added to him in his humility. Some men say that Constantine, who reigned after Heraclius, whose son he was, imitated John in this respect. During the lifetime of the saintly patriarch, the Persians came up and laid waste Syria and took its inhabitants captive. All who escaped from the hands of the godless Persians ran to the person of the thrice blessed one as if to a waveless harbor, praying that they too might enjoy help and assistance from him, and the blessed man welcomed them and consoled them, not as if they were prisoners of war, but as though they were in truth his natural brothers. He accordingly gave immediate orders that the wounded and sick should be put to bed in hostels and hospitals, which he himself had founded, and that they should receive care and medical treatment without payment, and that then they should be free to leave as each of them should choose. To those who were well but destitute and came to the daily distribution, he gave 6 pence apiece to the men and 1 shilling apiece to the women and children as being weaker members. Now some of the women who came begging for alms wore ornaments and bracelets, and those who were entrusted with the distribution reported this to the Patriarch. Then he, who was really gentle and of a cheerful countenance, put on a grim look and a harsh voice and said, If you wish to be distributors for humble John, or rather for Christ, obey unquestioningly the divine command which says, Give to every man that asks of thee. But if you vex by your inquiries those who come to receive alms, God has no need of mischievous servants, nor has humble John. If indeed the money given were mine and had come into existence with me, I might do well to be niggardly with my own possessions. But if the money given happens to be God's, where his property is in question, he wishes his commands to be followed absolutely. But if perhaps, because you have no faith, or of little faith, you fear that the amount given away may exceed the monies which we receive, I myself refuse to share in your little faith. For if it is by God's good will that I, an unworthy servant, am the dispenser of his gifts, then were the whole world to be brought together in Alexandria and ask for alms, they would not straiten the Holy Church, nor the inexhaustible treasures of God. When he had dismissed them, after banishing the indolence and little faith which beset them, he told the following story to his companions, who were astonished at his God-bestowed sympathy. When I was in Cyprus and was but a stripling of about 15 years old, I saw one day in my sleep a certain maiden whose countenance outshone the sun, and who was adorned beyond all human imagining, and she came and stood by my bed and touched me on the side. I woke up and saw her really standing there, and I perceived that she was no woman. I crossed myself and said to her, Who are you, and how did you dare to come into my room while I was sleeping? She had, too, a wreath of olive branches on her head, and then, with a joyous countenance and a smile on her lips, she said to me, I am the first of the daughters of the king. On hearing this, I at once did obeisance to her, and then she said to me, If you will have me as a friend, I will lead you into the presence of the king, for no one has a free access to him as I have, for I caused him to put on man's nature on earth and bring salvation to men. With these words, she disappeared. When I came to myself, I understood the vision and said, Verily, she is either sympathy or charity, and for this reason she had a wreath of olive leaves on her head, for it was certainly sympathy with and pity for mankind that made our Lord become incarnate in our flesh. I dressed quickly, and without waking anyone in the house, I made my way to the church, for it was already dawn. And on my way, I met a brother shivering with cold, so I took off my goatskin and gave it to him, and said to myself, Now by this I shall know whether my vision was really a true one or sent by a demon. And truth bore witness, for before I reached the church, a man clad in white suddenly met me and handed me a bag with 100 numismata in it, saying, Take this, brother, and use it as you like. In my joy, I turned round directly I had taken it, wishing to give him back the bag, as I was not in want, but I could not see anybody. Then I said, Certainly, it was not my imagination. While a crowd of people were still in the city, one of the strangers, noticing John's remarkable sympathy, determined to try the blessed man. So he put on old clothes and approached him as he was on his way to visit the sick in the hospitals, for he did this 2 or 3 times a week, and said to him, "Have mercy upon me, for I am a prisoner of war." John said to his purse-bearer, "Give him 6 numismata." After the man had received these, he went off, changed his clothes, met John again in another street, and, falling at his feet, said, "Have pity upon me, for I am in want." The Patriarch again said to his purse-bearer, "Give him 6 numismata." As he went away, the purse-bearer whispered in the Patriarch's ear, "By your prayers, master, this same man has had alms from you twice over." But the Patriarch pretended not to understand. Soon the man came again for the 3rd time to ask for money, and the attendant, carrying the gold, nudged the Patriarch to let him know that it was the same man. Whereupon the truly merciful and beloved of God said, "Give him 12 numismata, for perchance it is my Christ, and he is making trial of me." There was a foreign captain who had fallen upon evil days. He came to the blessed man, and with many tears besought him to show mercy to him, as he did to all others. So John directed that he should be given 5 pounds of gold. With these, the captain went and bought a cargo, and no sooner had he gone on board than straightway, as it chanced, he suffered shipwreck outside the Pharos, but he did not lose his ship. Then, trusting to John's goodwill, he again applied to him, saying, "Have mercy upon me, as God had mercy upon the world." The Patriarch said to him, "Believe me, brother, if you had not mixed your own remaining monies with the money of the church, you would not have been shipwrecked. For you had them from an evil source, and thus the money coming from a good source was lost with it." However, he gave fresh instructions this time that 10 pounds of gold were to be given him, and he was not to mix other money with it. Again, the captain bought a cargo, and when he had sailed for 1 day, a violent wind arose, and he was hurled upon the land and lost everything, including the ship, and he and the crew barely escaped with their lives. After this, from despair and destitution, the captain decided to hang himself. But God, who ever takes forethought for the salvation of men, revealed this to the most blessed Patriarch, who, hearing what had happened to the captain, sent him word to come to him without delay. The latter came before him with his head sprinkled with dust and his tunic torn and in disorder. When the Patriarch saw him in this guise, he found fault with him and said, "May the Lord be propitious unto you. Blessed be God. I believe his word that from today on you will not be wrecked again as long as you live. This disaster happened to you because you had acquired the ship itself, too, by unjust means." He immediately ordered that one of the ships belonging to the Holy Church, of which he was head, should be handed over to the captain, a swift sailor, laden with 20,000 bushels of corn. The captain, when he had received the ship, sailed away from Alexandria, and on his return he made a solemn statement to the following effect: "We sailed for 20 days and nights, and owing to a violent wind, we were unable to tell in what direction we were going, either by the stars or by the coast. But the only thing we knew was that the steersman saw the Patriarch by his side, holding the tiller and saying to him, 'Fear not, you are sailing quite right.' Then, after the 20th day, we caught sight of the islands of Britain, and when we had landed, we found a great famine raging there. Accordingly, when we told the chief man of the town that we were laden with corn, he said, 'God has brought you at the right moment. Choose as you wish, either 1 numisma for each bushel, or a return freight of tin.' And we chose half of each." Then the story goes on to tell of a matter which, to those who are ignorant of God's free gifts, is either hard to believe or quite incredible, but to those who have experienced his marvelous works, it is both credible and acceptable. "Then we set sail again," said the captain, "and joyfully made once more for Alexandria, putting in our way at Pentapolis. The captain then took out some of the tin to sell, for he had an old business friend there who asked for some, and he gave him a bag of about 50 pounds. The latter, wishing to sample it to see if it was of good quality, poured some into a brazier, and found that it was silver of the finest quality. He thought that the captain was tempting him, so carried the bag to him and said, 'May God forgive you. Have you ever found me deceiving you that you tempt me by giving me silver instead of tin?' The captain was dumbfounded by his words, and replied, 'Believe me, I thought it was tin. But if he who turned the water into wine has turned my tin into silver in answer to the Patriarch's prayers, that is nothing strange. However, that you may be satisfied, come down to the ship with me, and look at the rest of the mass from which I gave you some.' So they went and discovered that the tin had been turned into the finest silver. Mark, ye lovers of Christ, this miracle is not strange, for he who multiplied the 5 loaves and at another time converted the waters of the Nile into blood, transformed a rod into a serpent, and changed fire into dew, easily accomplished this miracle too, in order to enrich his servant and show mercy to the captain. One Sunday, when this saintly man was going down to his church, there came to him one whose whole house had been despoiled by burglars. They had taken everything, even down to his mattress. The sufferer was in great distress, but as those who had robbed his house could not be found in spite of a strict search, he was finally obliged by his extreme want, very shamefacedly, to apply to the saint and told him about his misfortune. The saint was very sorry for him, for he was one of the prominent foreign residents, and whispered to the man in charge of the gold to give him 15 pounds of gold. When the latter went out to give the money to the man, he took counsel with the cashier and with the treasurer, and at the devil's prompting, they grudged him so large a sum, and gave him only 5 pounds. On the venerable archbishop's return from the service, a widow woman, who had an only son, brought him news that she intended to give him 500 pounds of gold. After he had received this message and dismissed his venerable council, he summoned the stewards and said to them, "How many pounds did you give to my suppliant?" And they answered, 15 pounds, sir, as your holiness commanded. But by the grace residing in him, he perceived that they were lying. So he sent for the recipient and asked him how much he had received. On his replying 5 pounds, the saint produced from his venerable hand the bond the woman had given him and said to them, "God will demand the other 1,000 pounds from you, for if you had given 15 pounds as my humbleness ordered, she who has offered me 500 pounds would have given 15. And to convince you of this, I will send and ask the giver to come." He dispatched 2 pious men to fetch the very pious woman who had given him the bond, and to bring her to the baptistry. He sent her a message, "Come to my humbleness, and bring with you the offering which God put it into your heart to bring to him." She arose hurriedly and came into the presence of the saint, bringing the sum of money with her. After receiving her oblation and bestowing many blessings upon her and her son, the patriarch said to her, "I charge you by your prayers, mother, tell me, did you intend to give only this to Christ, or a little more in addition?" As she perceived that the inspired man had guessed what she had done, she fell to trembling and said, "By your reverence's holy prayers, and by my patron Saint Minot, I had written 1,500 on the bond, and an hour before I gave it to your reverence, as I was standing during the service, I opened it unthinkingly and read it. I, your unworthy servant, had written it with my own hand, and yet I found that the 10 had got wiped out of itself. Then, in my amazement, I said to myself, evidently it is God's will that I should not give more than 5. When the patriarch had dismissed the pious woman, the stewards who had disobeyed him fell at his feet, craving his forgiveness and assuring him that they would never transgress again.
Nikitas the patrician had observed this virtuous man's great mindedness, and seen that his hand was open unsparingly, and gave to all as if from an ever-flowing spring. At the suggestion of certain slanderers, he visited the saint and said to him, "The empire is in great straits and needs money. Therefore, instead of spending so prodigally the money that comes into you, give it into the public purse for the benefit of the empire." The saint remained unperturbed by these words and replied, "To my mind, my lord, it is not right to give to an earthly king what is offered to the heavenly king. But even if your heart is set on some such plan, let me tell you that humble John will not give you a penny. But see, the money chest of Christ is there under my lowly bed. Do as you will." The patrician got up at once and shouted to his own followers to carry off the treasure. He loaded them with all the money, only leaving the patriarch 100 pounds. As the men were going down, carrying their burden, others were coming up, carrying small jars containing money sent to the patriarch from Africa, all which jars were labeled either finest honey or unsmoked honey. The patrician read the labels as he went down, and asked the patriarch to send him some of this honey for his cellar, for he knew well that the saint never bore malice. When the man in charge of the jars came up and gave the patriarch the documents he carried, he announced to him that instead of honey, there was money in the jars. Thereupon that truly gentle shepherd forthwith sent Nikitas a pot labeled finest honey, and with it a tablet on which were written these words, Our Master, who said, I will not fail thee nor forsake thee, cannot lie, and is a true God. Therefore corruptible man cannot straiten God, who gives life and food to all. Farewell. He ordered the men who were going to carry the jar to Nicetas to open it in his presence and say to him, all the jars you saw being brought up are full of money instead of honey. Now it happened that the men bearing the jar, as well as the Patriarch's note, were brought to Nicetas as he sat at table. When they came in, and he saw only one jar, he said, tell him, surely you are angry with me, great master. You have not in the past sent me only one jar. After handing him the tablet, when they had unsealed the jar, the men straightway poured out all the contents, and informed him that the rest of the jars which he had seen were likewise all filled, not with honey, but with money. Then when he read the words, corruptible man is unable to straiten God, he was pricked to the heart by the message, and said, as the Lord liveth, neither will Nicetas straiten him, for he is but a sinful and corruptible man himself. And straightway he left his lunch, and taking with him all the money which he had carried off from the venerable father, and the jar which he had sent, as well as 300 pounds of his own, he made for the Patriarch's dwelling. He took the prayers of our Holy Father, the Lord Jesus Christ, our God, and mercy on us. Amen. None of his suite with him, but came to him in deep self-abasement, and besought him to implore God's forgiveness, as he had been incited to his act by others slanderously. He also assured the Patriarch that if he assigned him a penance, he would willingly accept and fulfill it. As the Patriarch marveled at the man's swift transformation, he did not upbraid him for what he had sought to do, but rather consoled him with comforting words. And from that day, so strong a bond of affection was knit between the two men that the Patriarch became the godfather of the patrician's children. He that tried Abraham for our advantage, that the whole world might know and imitate his faith, which was known only to God, also subjected this glorious John to trial. Now the manner of his trial has become an example for the benefit of God's holy churches, and this was the temptation. An indescribable number of fugitives from the Persians invaded Alexandria, as I have said before, and great scarcity of food prevailed because the river had not risen to its usual height. Therefore, after he had spent all the money he had, the Holy Patriarch sent and borrowed about 1,000 pounds from divers good Christians. After these too had been spent in their turn, the famine still prevailed, and no one was willing to lend him any more, as all feared the persistence of the famine. Since the need of those who had come to look for his support was still urgent, the blessed man continued in much anxiety, as all feared the persistence of the famine. Since the need of those who had come to look for his support was still urgent, the blessed man continued in much anxiety and prayer. Now a certain landowner who lived in the city noticed the straits, or rather the absolute poverty to which the saint had been reduced. Now it was this man's wish to become a deacon of the Holy Church, but he had married a second time. So he hoped to persuade the holy man to ordain him by reason of the stress which encompassed him on every side. They sent a petition to him in the following terms, who did not dare to utter such a request to his face. To the most holy and thrice blessed Father of Fathers John, the deputy of Christ, the request and petition of Cosmos, an unworthy servant of the servants of thy holiness. Having learned, most reverend sir, of the shortage in food which oppresses thine honorable person by the permission of God, or rather in consequence of our sins, I thy servant do not consider it just to live at my ease while my master abides in continual need. Your unworthy servant has 200,000 bushels of wheat and 180 pounds of gold. Only these I beg, that I may offer to Christ through you, Master. Only let me, unworthy though I am, enjoy the post of deacon unto you, that by standing beside my Lord at the holy altar, I may be cleansed from the profligacy of my sins. For, true herald of God, it has been said by the holy apostle Paul that there is made of necessity a change also of the law. After receiving this letter, the wise man of God sent for the writer and said to him, was it you who sent me the petition by your notary and son? And I was answering, yes, master. The blessed man sent everyone else out of the room, and in his great sympathy, he did not wish to humiliate Cosmos before them all. Then he turned to him and said, your offering is a generous one, and much needed at the present time, but it has a blemish. And you know that in the law, a sheep, be it large or small, was not accepted for an offering unless it were without blemish. And for this reason, God would not take heed of Cain, even when he offered a sacrifice. As to what you said, brother, that there is made of necessity a change also of the law, the apostle said that about the law of the old covenant. For what is that? That James, the Lord's brother, says, for whosoever shall keep the whole law and yet stumble in one point, he has become guilty of all. But as regards my brethren the poor and the Holy Church, God who fed them before you and I were born will himself feed them also in our day, but only if we keep his commands inviolate. For he who long ago multiplied the 5 loaves is able also to bless the 10 bushels in my granary. Therefore I tell thee, my son, what is written in the Act, thou art neither part nor lot in this matter. After he had dismissed this man, who was sullen at not having achieved his purpose, news is brought that 2 of the church's fast-sailing ships, which he had sent to Sicily for wheat, had cast anchor in the harbor. After these tidings, the blessed man knelt on the ground and gave thanks to Almighty God, saying, I thank thee, Master, that thou didst not permit thy servant to sell thy grace for money. Verily, they that seek the Lord and keep the canons of thy holy church shall never want any good thing. On one occasion, 2 of the clerics committed a sin, for they attacked each other. And in consequence, the Patriarch suspended them from their duties for some days, according to the canon. One of them willingly suffered his punishment and acknowledged his sin. But the other, a man of bad character, hailed the punishment with joy, for the wretched fellow was seeking a pretext for not going to church, and desired a long freedom for his lawless doing. And he was very wroth with the Patriarch, and threatened to do him as much harm as he himself could purpose. Some even say that it was he who talked slanderously about the church's money to Nicetas the patrician, who carried it off high-handedly, as we have already recounted. This fellow's maliciousness and perverse purpose were reported to the blessed Pope, who being a true shepherd called to mind him who said, who is weak, and I am not weak, and again, you that are strong, bear ye the infirmities of the weak. Accordingly, he determined to send for him, exhort him fittingly, and release him from the suspension, for he saw that the wolf was trying to seize the sheep. But by God's dispensation, in order that the Patriarch's forgiving spirit might be made known to all men, he forgot to send for the cleric and release him from his suspension. When Pascha came round, and he was near the holy altar to offer the unbloody sacrifice, and the deacon had all but reached the close of the universal petition, and the holy veil was about to be lifted, he suddenly thought of the malicious cleric. And straightway he remembered the divine command, which says, Therefore thou art offering thy gift at the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. So he instructed the deacon to begin the deacon's prayer over again, and when he had finished, to repeat it once again, until his holiness returned. For he told him that his stomach was troubling him. Then he went into the sacristy of the church, and at once dispatched about 20 vergers to search for the evil-minded cleric, since the shepherd's intention was to snatch the sheep from the lion's mouth. And God does the will of those who fear him, caused the cleric to fall into their hands at once. And when he was brought in, the Patriarch, first of all, so a witness testifies, threw himself down and said, Forgive me, brother. Then, through all of the honorable Patriarch's high priesthood and the presence of the onlookers, but still more through fear of condemnation and dread, lest fire should come down from heaven at that very moment and destroy him, as he looked at that venerable gray head lying on the ground, the cleric too threw himself on his knees, begging for forgiveness and mercy. After the Patriarch had said, May God forgive us all, they both arose and went into church. And thus with great joy and delight, the Patriarch stood before the holy altar with a clear conscience, and was able to say to God, Forgive us our debt, as we forgive our debtors. From that day, the cleric who held the post of reader in the church was so chastened and filled with compunction that later he was accounted worthy to be ordained priest. Some of the inspired fathers of the church say it is characteristic of the angels never to fight at all, or to abide in complete and perpetual peace, of men to quarrel indeed, but to be reconciled immediately without delay, of demons to fight and to remain unreconciled all day long. I write this, lovers of Christ, as an introduction to the following narrative. It happened one day that the glorious Patriarch John had a dispute with the aforementioned patrician Nicetas about a public matter. The cause of the quarrel must also be stated, as it is edifying. This was the quarrel. The patrician on his side wanted to regulate the market so as to ensure profit for the state, whereas the Pope could not tolerate this because he took thought for the welfare of the poor. They argued about this for a long time in the council chamber, and as they could not come to an agreement, they separated in anger and unreconciled to each other. It was then the fifth hour. The Patriarch's resistance and bitterness were in support of God's command, while the patricians were for the sake of a financial profit. Yet a righteous man says, man ought not to grow angry either for a reasonable or unreasonable cause. So at the 11th hour, the Patriarch sent this memorable message to the patrician by the hands of the chief elder, accompanied by the clergy. Master, the sun is nigh setting. When Nicetas heard the message, he could not bear the fever in his heart. As it pricked to the soul by the divine fire of the saint's message, he suddenly dissolved the tears, and rising went to seek the blessed man. Directly the righteous man saw him. He said, the Son of the Church, ever obedient to her voice, has done well to come. Next they both knelt down and embraced each other. Then seating themselves, the Patriarch opened his wise mouth and said, Truly, Master, had I not known that you were very disturbed about this matter, I should not have hesitated to come to your lordship. For our Lord and God Jesus Christ used to go round the towns and villages and houses himself, and visited individuals too. All present were edified and amazed by the Patriarch's humility, and the patrician answered, Really, Father, my ears are no longer big enough to hold all the slanderous tales people come and tell me. Thereupon the wise teacher said to him, Listen, son and brother, if we were prepared to believe all we hear, we should be responsible for many sins, especially at the present time, when the majority of men hate one another. For I too was often led astray by persons who brought me information about public affairs, and often after I had inflicted punishment wrongfully, I found I had been misdirected, for others would come later and tell me that I had been misinformed in giving my judgment. Therefore, after this had happened to me 2 or 3 times, I made it a rule for myself never to give effect to any decision except after hearing both parties, and to assign to those who brought the information, if their information was false, the same punishment as absolutely fitting for the man informed against. So from that day, no one ventures to come to me with information about anyone without danger to himself. Wherefore, my son, I adjure and advise your excellency to do likewise. For those entrusted with authority have often been known to put innocent men to death, if they have been credulous, and have decided cases that came before them without full inquiry. And the patrician, as if warned by God, agreed to observe this rule inviolate. The glorious man had a nephew named George. One day, this nephew had a quarrel with one of the shopkeepers in the town and was grievously insulted by him. George was bitterly vexed, not only because he had been publicly dishonored, but more because it had been at the hands of a mean fellow, and most of all because he was the nephew of the Pope. So he went to see the latter in his private chamber, weeping bitterly. When the gentle Patriarch beheld him so distressed and tearful, he inquired the reason for his state of misery, wishing to learn what had caused it. George, however, could not himself give a clear statement because of the bitterness of soul which had overmastered him. Accordingly, his companions, who had been present when his insult was put upon him by the shopkeeper, began to explain the reason to the Patriarch. They said, It is not right for your holiness to be so despised that your relatives and kinsfolk should be insulted by abandoned creatures. Then he, who was indeed a true physician, wished first to treat his nephew's inflammation, as it were, with a soothing salve, and afterwards, by his wise words, to cut out and remove the source of pain as if by the knife. Accordingly, he began to allay his suffering by these words. What, did someone actually dare to open his mouth and shout recriminations at you? Trust me, child, and I, your father, will do a thing to him today, which all Alexandria will be astonished. When he saw that his nephew was now calm, and had shaken off all his grief, for he imagined that the Patriarch would proceed against the man who had insulted him, and have him scourged and paraded in public by the overseer of the market, he kissed his breast and said to him, My boy, if you are in reality the nephew of my humbleness, prepare yourself to be beaten and insulted by everyone. The true relationship is not declared through flesh and blood, but through virtue of the soul. He immediately summoned the overseer of the shopkeepers and ordered him never in future to accept from that shopkeeper either his customary tip or the public taxes or the rent or the shop, for this shop too belonged to the Holy Church. All were amazed at the man's unshaken magnanimity and understood that this was what he meant when he said, I will do a thing to him which will astonish all Alexandria, that is, to show him favor instead of taking revenge on him. The blessed Patriarch was once informed that a certain cleric harbored a grudge against another and was quite irreconcilable. He accordingly asked for the man's name and rank. And on the morrow, which was Sunday, he learned that he was a deacon called Damien. He therefore ordered the archdeacon to point Damien out to him when he came into church, but not to say anything to him. At the Sunday service the next morning, this deacon was present with the others. As soon as he saw him, the archdeacon pointed him out to the Patriarch. The latter was present that day at the holy altar for this one purpose, but he had not confided to anyone what he intended doing. When therefore the deacon Damien came up in his turn to receive Holy Communion from him, the saint took his hand and said, Go first and be reconciled to thy brother, but then come and partake worthily of the immaculate mysteries of the forgiving Christ. Damien was too ashamed to contradict the saint before such a number of clerics, especially in such a place in such an awful hour. So he agreed to do this, and afterwards the saint administered the holy mysteries to him. From thenceforth all, both clerics and laymen, took care not to bear malice to each other, for fear the saint should make them contemptible and ashamed, as he had made the deacon. This saintly man had also a good knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, not so much an accurate knowledge of the words through learning them by heart, which is but for vainglory, but by actually practicing their precepts and keeping their commandments. If you look in at his council room any day, there is no idle word spoken, unless he was engaged in the settlement of some civic matter, but only stories of the Holy Fathers, or scriptural questions, or dogmatic problems, due to the multitude of unmentionable heretics who swarmed in the land. If perchance someone began slanderous gossip, the Patriarch, like a wise man, would courteously turn him off it by starting another subject. But if the gossiper persisted, he said nothing more at the time, would point him out to the doorkeeper and tell him never again to admit him of those that came to consult the Patriarch. In this way the others were taught through him to practice self-control. We must not omit to mention another rule which a just man put into practice. He had heard that when an emperor is crowned, first of all, the members of the Guild of Tomb Builders have access to the royal presence, while the whole Senate and the army are in attendance. Directly after the crowning, the builders of the imperial tomb come in and bring with them 4 or 5 small pieces of marble of different colors and say to him, Of which mineral does your majesty desire his tomb to be made? Thus suggesting to him that, as a corruptible mortal who soon passes away, he should take thought for his own soul and govern his kingdom righteously. The blessed man imitated this truly praiseworthy custom and gave orders for a tomb to be built for him in the place where the previous patriarchs were buried, but to leave it unfinished until his actual death. That on some great feast day, when the clergy were present, the zealous Christians, as they are called, should come in and say to him, Master, your tomb is still unfinished. Allow us, we pray, to finish it, because you do not know at what hour the thief will come. The Patriarch arranges to be done in that wise in order to leave a good example to his successors. Sing like the Holy Father John the Almsgiver, Pope of Alexandria, Holy Father Blood. Amen. The Lord allowed his churches in Jerusalem to be burnt down by the heathen Persians because of the multitude of our sins. So when the saintly Patriarch John learned that the Holy Modestus, Patriarch of Jerusalem, was in great distress, he sent him towards the rebuilding and repairing of the churches 1,000 numismata, 1,000 sacks of wheat, and 1,000 of pulse, 1,000 pounds of iron, 1,000 casks of dry fish called nemamene, 1,000 jars of wine, and 1,000 Egyptian workmen, for the following letter. Forgive me, true workmen of Christ, for sending nothing worthy of Christ's churches. Rest assured that if it were possible, I would come and work myself in the house of the resurrection of Christ our God. Further, I beseech your venerable self not to inscribe the name of my unworthy self anywhere at all. Rather ask Christ to inscribe my name there, where the inscription is truly blessed. Another good habit the saint also adopted, namely sleeping on the cheapest of beds and using only very poor coverings in his own cell. One of the city's landowners once went into the Patriarch's room and saw that he was only covered with a torn and worn quilt. So he sent him a quilt costing 36 denismata, and besought him earnestly to cover himself with that, in memory, he said, of the giver. John took and used it for one night because of the giver's insistence, but throughout the night he kept saying to himself, so his chamber attendants related, "Who shall say that humble John," for he ever called himself that, "was lying under a cover that cost me 36 denismata, whilst Christ's brethren are pinched with cold? How many are there at this moment grinding their teeth because of the cold? And how many have only a rough blanket, half below and half above them, so they cannot stretch out their legs, but lie shivering, rolled up like a ball of thread? How many are sleeping on the mountain without food or light, suffering twofold pangs from cold and hunger? How many would like to be filled with the outer leaves of the vegetables which are thrown away from my kitchen? How many would like to dip their bit of bread into the soup water which my cooks throw away? How many would like even to have a sniff at the wine which is poured out of my wine cellar? How many strangers are there at this hour in the city who have no lodging place, but lie about in the marketplace, perhaps with the rain falling on them? How many are there who have not tasted oil for 1 month or even 2? How many have no second garment, either in summer or winter, and so live in misery? And yet you, who hope to obtain everlasting bliss, go to drink wine and eat large fishes and spend your time in bed, and now in addition to all those evils, you are being kept warm by a coverlet worth 36 denismata. Verily, if you lived like that and passed your life in such ease, do not expect to enjoy the good things prepared for us on high. But you will certainly be told, as was that other rich man, "Thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, but the poor evil things. And now they are comforted, but thou art in anguish." But blessed be God, you shall not cover John a second night, for it is right and acceptable to God that 144 of your brothers and masters should be covered, rather than you, one miserable creature. Or 4 blankets could be bought for 1 denisma. Early on the following morning, therefore, he sent it to be sold. But the man who had given it saw it, and bought it for 36 denismata, and again brought it to the Patriarch. But when he saw it put up for sale again the next day, he bought it once more, and carried it to the Patriarch, and implored him to use it. When he had done this for the 3rd time, the saint said to him jokingly, "Let us see whether you or I will give up first." For the man was exceedingly well-to-do, and the saint took pleasure in getting money out of him. And he used to say that if with the object of giving to the poor, anybody were able, without ill will, to strip the rich right down to their shirts, he would not do wrong, more especially if they were heartless skinflints. For thereby he gets a twofold profit. First, he saves their souls. Secondly, he himself will gain no small reward therefrom. As to confirm this saying, he would adduce as trustworthy evidence the tale about St. Epiphanius and John the Patriarch of Jerusalem, to the wit of St. Epiphanius, who skillfully steal away the Patriarch John's silver and give it to the poor. Poor John was able to give profitable instruction to a man, even against the latter's will, not only by stories from his own life, but also by other true and God-pleasing tales. And he used always to say to those that heard him, "If some men have not spared their own blood, but have given even that for the service of their brethren, or rather of Christ, how much more then ought not we, with zeal and humility, to give of our possessions to the poor and needy, so that we may receive our recompense from God, the just rewarder, on that fearful and terrible day of vengeance, when he who sowed sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sowed in blessings, that is, generously and large-heartedly, will also reap very abundantly, that is, he will inherit those good things which pass all understanding." Our saint, who was adorned with so many good deeds, was not wanting either in this respect, for he dearly loved reading the lives of the Holy Fathers, especially of those who practiced almsgiving. One day, when reading the life of St. Serapion, who was called Sindonius, he came across the following passage. Serapion once gave his cloak to a poor man, and as he walked on and met another who was shivering, he gave back one his tunic, and then sat down naked, holding the Holy Gospel. And on being asked, "Who has taken your clothes, Father?" He pointed to the gospel and said, "This is the robber." Another time he sold the gospel to give an alms. And when a disciple said to him, "Father, where is your gospel?" he replied, "Son, believe me, it was the gospel which told me, 'Sell all you have and give it to the poor.' So I sold it, gave to the poor, that on the day of judgment you may have freer access to God." He also read, "Another time a widow asked the same St. Serapion for alms because of her children who were hungry. And as he had nothing whatever to give her, he obliged her to sell him to some pagan actors. And these he converted to Christianity in a few days." After reading all this about St. Serapion, John was so overcome and filled with admiration for his goodness that he burst into tears, and then summoned all his own officials and read all these portions about St. Serapion to them and said, "On my soul, you lovers of Christ, see how greatly a man is edified by reading the lives of the Holy Fathers. For believe me, until today I really thought that I was doing a little something by giving away the monies which come to me. For I did not know that some, when overcome by compassion, even sold themselves." Above all, this saint ever honored and reverenced the monastic habit, and felt special sympathy for any monk who was hard-pressed for his bodily needs. And he had this peculiarity, which was not shared by many, that he would never listen to an accusation, either false or true, against any wearer of the monastic habit. But owing to the suggestion of some slanderers, he once had the following experience. A monk wandered round in the city, begging alms for several days, accompanied by a rather young girl. Some persons who saw him were scandalized and imagined she must be his wife, and therefore carried accusations against him to the Patriarch. "Because, Reverend Father," said they, "he is turning the angelic robe of the monastic life into ridicule by having this girl as wife." Accordingly, the Patriarch, thinking to prevent sins against God, who after all had appointed him to this end, immediately gave orders for the woman to be beaten and separated from him, and for the monk to be scourged and to be imprisoned in solitary confinement. The saint's order was carried out with all speed. And in the night, the monk appeared to him in his dreams, showing him his back, which was all torn to ribbons, for the officers of the scourged pitilessly, and said to him, "So it please you, my Lord Patriarch, this one time you have made a mistake, as any other man might." And with these words he vanished. In the morning the holy man recalled the dream which had come to him in the night, and sat on his bed full of thought. Then quickly he sent and had the monk brought to him by his chancellor from the place where he had been confined, for the blessed man kept wondering in his mind whether he would resemble the monk whom he had seen in his dream. So when the monk came in, walking with great difficulty, he could hardly move now because of the terrible flogging he had endured, and the Patriarch saw his face, he remained speechless and immovable, and buried in thought, unable to utter a sound. Only with his hand he motioned to the monk to sit down near him on his couch. After he had regained his self-possession and signed himself with the cross, he begged the monk to gird a cloth round him, and then to undress without shame, so that he might see whether his back was in such a state as he had seen in his dream. With much reluctance the monk consented, girt on his own loincloth, and began to undress. Now as he was undressing to show his back to the Holy Patriarch, by the unexpected will of God, the loincloth he had on got loose and dropped to the ground, and all there saw that he was a eunuch, which no one had noticed before, as he was a very young man. When the Patriarch and all who were with him had seen this, and especially his horribly mutilated back, the Patriarch immediately sent to subject to penance those who had slandered this monk without inquiry, while he made many apologies to the most holy monk, saying that it was through ignorance that he had sinned against him and against God. Further, the just man gave the monk this advice. It is not right, my son," he said, "that those who are clad in the holy and angelic habit as you are should wander about unguardedly in cities, and above all, they should not take a woman about with them to the scandal of the beholders." Then the monk, in deep humility, made his defense to the Holy Patriarch, saying, "I assure you, master, I am not lying. I was in Gaza a few days ago, and as I was coming out of the city to go and worship at the shrine of the holy Abbot Cyrus, this girl, who had so skillfully hung herself on to me, met me. It was already evening, and falling at my feet, she begged that she might journey with me. For, said she, I am a Jewess, and wish to become a Christian. And then she began to evoke horrible curses upon me if I left her to perish. Therefore, through fear of the judgment of God, I took her, thinking that Satan does not send temptation to eunuchs, I did not realize that he does not spare anyone. So when we came to the church, Your Holiness, and had finished our prayers, I had her baptized there in the Church of the Holy of Osiris, and in simplicity of heart I traveled about with her, asking a few alms in order that I might settle her in a convent. When he heard this, the Patriarch said, "Upon my soul, how many hidden servants God has, and we simple ones do not know them." Then he related to all those who were present the vision concerning the monk, which he had had in the night, and afterwards taking 100 demismata in his hand, offered them to the monk. But he, the God-loving man and true monk, would not hear of taking any sum worth mentioning, but spoke these words to the Patriarch: "I do not want these coins, master, for if a monk has faith, he does not need money. If he does need money, he has not faith." This remark, more than anything else, convinced his hearers that he was a servant of God. After kneeling before the Patriarch, he went away in peace. From henceforth, therefore, the Patriarch showed special honor and hospitality to monks, both to the good and to those who were reputed to be evil, and he had once built a hostel entirely for them and called it the Monks' Inn. When the plague was at one time raging in the city, the just man used to go and watch the funerals, for he said that this and the contemplation of graves were very edifying. Often, too, he would sit at the bedside of persons in their death anguish, and would close their eyes with his own hands, wishing thereby to keep the thought of his own death in continual remembrance. He also enjoined prayers for the dying to be celebrated diligently and perpetually, and in support of this he told the following story. A short time ago, he said, a man was captured by the Persians, and was taken to Persia, was confined in a dungeon called Oblivion. Then some other prisoners who escaped and reached Cyprus were asked by his parents whether they had seen him by any chance, to which they replied, "We buried him with our own hands." But that was not really the man about whom they were questioned, but another who resembled him greatly. They also told the parents the month and the day of his supposed death, and so the latter had prayers said 3 times a year for him whom they presumed to be dead. 4 years later, he escaped from the Persians and returned to Cyprus. Then his relative said, "We heard for certain, brother, that you were dead, and therefore we have held memorial services for you 3 times a year." On hearing that they did this for him 3 times a year, he asked on what month and day the services were held, and they replied, "At Epiphany, at Pascha, and at Pentecost." Whereupon he said, "On those 3 feasts in the year, a man in white raiment like the sun used to come and free me invisibly from my chains and from my cell, and all that day I walked about and no one recognized me, yet on the morrow there I was in chains again." And the Holy Patriarch used to say, we learn from this story that those who have fallen asleep obtain comfort from the prayers we make on their behalf. The effect produced by the sympathetic man's deeds was often the same as that which we hear followed the actions of the holy apostles. The many who observed his constant and unquestioning pity for the needy were often moved to sell many of their possessions and to bring the money and offer it to this kind-hearted servant of God. For instance, a man came one day bringing 7.5 pounds of gold, and told the holy man that it was all the gold he possessed. Then he begged him with many a prostration to pray to God to preserve his son, for he had an only boy about 15 years old, and also to bring back his ship safely from Africa, to which country it had sailed. The Patriarch took the money from his hand and marveled at the man's magnanimity in bringing him all the money he possessed. But on the man's behalf he offered up a lengthy prayer in his presence, and so dismissed him. Yet because of the man's great faith, he placed the bag containing the money under the holy table in the chapel of his own house, and at once celebrated the whole liturgy over it, earnestly importuning God on behalf of the giver to save the latter's son, and to bring back the ship safely, as the man had begged him to do. Before 30 days had passed, the son of him who had brought the 7.5 pounds to the Patriarch died, and 3 days after the boy's death, the ship arrived from Africa, on which the man's own brother sailed as shipmaster, but near the lighthouse he suffered shipwreck. All the cargo was lost, and only the lives of the crew and the empty ship were saved. When the ship owner, the father of the boy, heard of this further catastrophe which had befallen him, then in the words of the psalmist, his soul had almost dwelt in Hades. But before his grief for his son had been assuaged, he was further thrown into despair by the loss of the ship. All these occurrences are reported to the Patriarch John, who grieved almost more than the sufferer himself, especially over the loss of the man's only son. And as he did not know what to do, he besought God in his mercy to comfort the man through his boundless pity, He was ashamed to send for the man and comfort him face to face, but he did send him a message, not to let his spirits fail, reminding him that God is nothing without judgment, but all is to our profit, though we know it not. To show him that he would not lose the reward for the £7.5 and for the trust which he had placed in the Holy Patriarch, and further to teach us too to remain untroubled and thankful to God for any trials that may befall us after doing some good deeds. This true friend of Christ saw in a vision the following night a man in the likeness of the most holy Patriarch, saying to him, "Why are you so distressed and despondent, brother? Did you not ask me to implore God to save your son? Well, he is saved. For had he lived, he would have turned out a most pernicious and unclean fellow. Then as regards the ship, had not God been touched by your good deed and my unworthiness, if it had been determined that the vessel, souls, and all should go to the bottom, you would have lost your brother also. Rise and glorify God, who has granted you his life and has kept your son unspotted from this vain world." When the man awoke, he felt his soul comforted and freed from all sorrow. So he put on his clothes and went in haste to the most venerable Patriarch, and throwing himself at his feet, gave thanks to God and to him, and related the vision which he had seen. The just man heard his story, and then said, "Glory to the O merciful friend of man, for listening to my prayer, sinner though I be." And turning to the ship owner, he said, "Do not by any means ascribe your blessings wholly to my prayers, but rather to God and your own faith, for this it is which affected all." For the saint was exceedingly humble-minded, both in word and thought. One day this blessed Patriarch went to visit the poor in the quarter called Caesarium. For there he had some very long vaulted buildings erected. The floor was covered with wooden boards and mats, and rough rugs were provided. Here the poor could sleep during the winter months. Accompanying the Patriarch was a certain bishop, a lover of money, and of a most unsympathetic disposition. To him the blessed Patriarch said, "Give Christ's brethren a little present, brother Troilus," for that was his name. For someone had whispered to the Patriarch that the bishop's attendant was carrying 30 pounds of gold at that moment, in order to buy a set of engraved silver for the bishop's table. The bishop, reverencing the Patriarch's word, and more probably momentarily quickened in soul thereby, ordered the man carrying the 30 pounds of gold to give an emissary to each of the brethren sitting there. In this way, the large quantity of gold was quickly spent. After the Patriarch and the Bishop Troilus had both returned to their own residences, the latter, who had performed this act of charity, so to speak, against his will, was seized by unreasoning and soul-destroying anxiety over the money which had been distributed. And as an outcome of his miserliness and pitilessness and change of mind, a fit of shivers came over him, accompanied by an unnatural feverishness. In consequence of this unexpected illness, he straightway took to his bed. When the servant came from the most holy Patriarch, inviting him to dine, he excused himself, saying that from some cause or other he had an attack of ague. On receipt of this message, the Patriarch at once recognized that it was owing to his having given away those 30 pounds that the involuntary giver was ill. We have already said, Troilus was extremely avaricious and unsympathetic. John could not bear that he himself should be waited on at table while the other lay in torments in his bed. So in his unwonted arrogance, he quickly went to him, with a smile on his face, said to him, "You must forgive me, brother Troilus, for you imagined that I was serious when I asked you to give that large amount to our poor brethren. But let me tell you, I only said it in jest, for I wanted to give each of them an emissary for the holy feast. And as my purse-bearer had not a sufficient sum with him, I borrowed it from you. And now see, here are your 30 pounds. Hardly had Bishop Troilus seen the money in the venerable hand of the true physician and shepherd before the fever suddenly disappeared and the shivering ceased, and his ordinary strength and color returned, so that there was no concealing the fact that the money was the cause of the sudden indisposition. When he had accepted the gold from the Patriarch's venerable hands without making the slightest objection, the Patriarch asked him to acknowledge in writing that he abandoned any claim for interest on the 30 pounds of gold which had been distributed. This Troilus did with joy, and wrote as follows with his own hand, "O God, pray give John, the most blessed Patriarch of the city of Alexandria, the interest on the 30 pounds of gold which have been distributed in thy name, as I have received mine own back." The Patriarch, having received this acknowledgment, took the bishop back to dine with him, for as we have already said, Bishop Troilus had suddenly recovered. However, God the rewarder, wishing to chasten him and also to arouse him to pity and sympathy for his fellow creatures, showed him in a dream that same day when he was taking a nap after dining with the Patriarch how great a treasure, how great a reward he had lost. I saw, said he, a house whose beauty and size no human art could imitate, with a gateway all of gold, and above the gateway an inscription painted on wood, which ran thus: the eternal home and resting place of Bishop Troilus. When I read this, I was overjoyed, he continued, for I knew that the king had granted me the enjoyment of this house. But I had scarcely finished reading this inscription, when behold, an imperial chamberlain appeared with others of the divine retinue. And as he drew near to the gateway of the radiant house, he said to his servants, "Take down that inscription." When they had taken it down, he said, "Change it, and put up one which the King of the world has sent." So they took away the one, and fixed up another, while I was looking on. And on it was written, "The eternal home and resting place of John, the Archbishop of Alexandria, bought for 30 pounds. When I saw that, he said, I awoke, and went related to the great arch-shepherd what I had seen in my sleep. And Bishop Troilus was benefited by the instruction. From that time he became compassionate. The Lord, who once took away all Job's wealth, did the same to this virtuous John. For the ships of the church of which he was head met with such a violent storm in the Adriatic that the crew were forced to jettison the whole cargo, and all the ships were there at the same time. And the weight of their freight was exceedingly heavy, for they had waterproof garments and silver and other valuable goods, so that the weight of what was lost was estimated at 3,400 weight, for there were more than 13 ships, each carrying 10,000 arquebuses. Directly they reached Alexandria and cast anchor, all the ship masters and the captains took refuge in the church. When the saint heard of this and learned the reason of their plight, he sent them a message written by his own hand, and in these words: "The Lord gave, brethren, and the Lord, as he willed, has also taken away. As it seemed good to the Lord, so has it come to pass. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Come out freely, children, and do not be afraid because of this, for the Lord will again take thought for the morrow." The next day, almost half the city came up to the council chamber, anxious to console the glorious saint. But he anticipated them by saying to them all, "My sons and brethren, do not be cast down at all by this mishap to the ship. For believe me, humble John is found to be the cause of it. For had I not been high-minded, I should not have met with this misfortune. But because I had lofty plans with regard to the things that are God's, and I thought I was doing great things by distributing what belongs to men, this has befallen me. And God allowed this to happen to bring me to my senses. For almsgiving often exalts the mind and makes the foolish man haughty, whereas an unexpected calamity humbles him who patiently endures it. The Holy Scripture says, poverty humbleth a man. And again, David, recognizing the truth, said, "It is good for me that thou hast humbled me, that I might learn thy statutes." Thus I was the cause of two misfortunes. First, I lost the wherewithal to make distributions for vainglory. Secondly, such large sums of money have been lost through my fault, that now I have to bear the blame for the persons in distress. However, beloved, God is the same now as he was in the times of Job the righteous, not because of my poverty, but because of the need of those in want. He will not desert us. He himself has said, "I will in no wise fail thee, neither will I in any wise forsake thee." And again, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things should be added unto you." In this wise, the citizens who were anxious to console him, as I have said, were in fact consoled by his beatitude. After a very short time, God doubled our new Job's possessions, and he was again the same magnanimous man in the way of sympathy, and if anything, he is even more to be revered than formerly. One day the saint gave to one of his servants, who had been reduced to extreme poverty, 2 pounds of gold with his own hands, so that no one might know of it. When his servant said, "After this gift I shall no longer have the courage to look you in the face, a face so dear, so like an angel," he made this wise and praiseworthy answer: "I have not yet shed my blood on your behalf, brother, as Christ our God, my Master, and the Master of us all, commanded me." A man was carried by the tax collectors and was not able to pay, for the crops had failed through the Nile not having risen as usual. So he went to a military commander, one of the great men, and besought him to leave him 50 pounds of gold, and offered to give security for double the value of desire. The officer promised to give it to him, but postponed doing so at the time. But as the collectors pressed the man hard, he too, like the rest, steered his course to the all-receiving harbor, to the gentle and admirable Patriarch. Almost before he had fully explained the circumstances, the Pope said, "Why, if necessary, my son, I will give you even this robe I am wearing." For among his other wonderful traits was this one: he could not bear to see anyone weeping for misery without mingling his own tears with his. And so now, without a moment's hesitation, he fulfilled the request of the man who asked for a loan. The next night the officers saw him standing near an altar to which many brought offerings, and for every offering which they lay down, they received 100-fold in exchange from the altar. Now the Patriarch was there too, behind him, and one offering was lying in front of them on a stool. And someone said to the officer, "Come, sir, pick up that offering and bring it to the altar, and take in exchange for it 100-fold. As he hesitated, the Patriarch ran forward, although he was behind him, and picked it up before he could do so, and carried it to the altar, and received, like the others, 100-fold in exchange. When the man awoke, he could not interpret the dream, but he sent and had the man brought to him who had requested a loan, in order that he might now give him the money. And when he came, the officer said to him, "Take the money now." The man, however, answered, "The Patriarch has anticipated your service, for as your lordship kept putting me off, I was obliged to flee for help to him as to a harbor, because the tax collectors were very insistent." Directly he heard that, the officer remembered his dream and cried, "You have said rightly that he has anticipated my service to you, but surely he has anticipated me, and woe be to him who wishes to do good and puts it off." And then he related his dream to him and to many others. One day the saint was in the church of the holy and victorious martyrs Cyrus and John, whither he had gone for prayer on their glorious feast day. And as he went out of the gate of the city, a woman was waiting for him, and fell at his feet, crying, "Avenge me on my brother-in-law, for he is wronging me." Some of the suite, who felt that they could speak for him, told her he would attend to the matter on his return. Whereupon the all-wise remarked, "How will God receive my prayers if I put this woman off? Who will go security for me that I shall live till tomorrow, and I might go to Christ with no excuse to make about her?" He did not leave the place until he had caused justice to be done for her. To help this glorious man toward attaining his purpose, which was indeed wholly divine, the Lord sent him John and Sophronius, who were wise in the things of God and worthy of perpetual remembrance. They were really honest counselors. The Patriarch gave unquestioning ear to them, as though they were his fathers, and was grateful to them for being most brave and valiant soldiers in the cause of the true faith. And trusting in the might of the Holy Spirit, they engaged in a war of dialectics, setting their own wisdom against that of the mad followers of Severus and of the other unclean heretics that were scattered about the country. They delivered many villages, very many churches, and monasteries too, like good shepherds saving the sheep from the jaws of these evil beasts. And for this reason, above others, the saintly Patriarch showed special honor to these saintly men. If by chance the blessed man heard of anyone being harsh and cruel to his slaves and giving to striking them, he would first send for him, and then admonish him very gently, saying, "Son, it has come to my sinful ears that by the prompting of our enemy you behave somewhat too harshly towards your household slaves. Now I beseech you, do not give place to anger, for God has not given them to us to strike, but to be our servants, and perhaps not even for that, but rather for them to be supported by us from the riches God has bestowed upon us. What price, tell me, must the man pay to purchase one who has been honored by creation in the likeness and similitude of God? Or do you, the slave's master, possess anything more in your own body than he does? Say a hand, or foot, or hearing, or a soul? Is he not in all things like unto you? Hearken to what the great luminary Paul says, for as many of you as were baptized into Christ did put on Christ. There can be neither Jew nor Greek, there can be neither bond nor free, for ye are all one man in Christ Jesus. If then we are equal before Christ, let us become equal in our relations one with another. For Christ took upon himself the form of a servant, thereby teaching us not to treat our fellow servants with disdain. For there is one master of all, who dwells in heaven, and yet regards the things of low degree. It does not say the rich things, but things of low degree. We give so much gold in order to make a slave for ourselves of a man honored and together with us, bought by the blood of our God and Master. For him is the heaven, for him the earth, for him the stars, for him the sun, for him the sea and all that is in it. At times the angels serve him. For him Christ washed the feet of slaves. For him he was crucified, and for him endured all his other sufferings. Yet you dishonor him who is honored of God, and you beat him mercilessly, as if he were not of the same nature as yourself. Tell me, is this all you care for, humble John? Would you like it if each time you sin, God were immediately to punish you and take vengeance on your sin? Assuredly not. Tell me how in your daily prayers you can say, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. With such and similar arguments from the store within him, would the Blessed One admonish the man, then dismiss him. Unless he heard that the master reformed his ways, he would arrange that the ill-treated slave should reach in secrecy a place of refuge. Then he would ask if he might buy him, and directly the just man had purchased him, he would immediately set him free. Another command which the admirable Patriarch consistently observed was, from him that would borrow of thee, turn not thou away. He never refused anyone who begged for that kind of help from him. A certain rascally impostor was aware of this, and asked him to lend him 20 pounds of gold. He was a so-called adventurer, and then treating the Patriarch as ungratefully as he had done many others, kept saying, he gave me nothing. The treasurers and administrators of the church funds accordingly demanded that he should be imprisoned and his goods confiscated. But the imitator of him who said, be good and merciful, even as your Father in heaven, who maketh his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust, would not hear of their troubling the man at all. Still they were furious against him for having tricked the Patriarch, and they said to the saint, it is not just, master, that this prodigal should get money which the poor ought to receive. In answer to this, Christ blessed said, assuredly, brethren, if you ever take anything away from that man in opposition to my purpose, you will transgress 2 commandments and only fulfill 1, even if what you take you give to the poor. For first, you will have shown yourselves impatient under law, to become a bad example to others. Secondly, you will have disobeyed your God, Master, said, him that taketh away thy goods, ask it not again. It is expedient, my children, that we should be an example of patience to all men. And so too says the apostle, why not suffer wrong and be defrauded? And though it is truly good to give to everyone that asks, yet it is nobler and more honorable to give to him who does not ask, and to him that taketh away our cloak against our will, we should give our tunic also, and must really imitate the angelic, or rather the divine nature. From our belongings our Lord commanded us to do good to our neighbor. Thou shalt do good unto thy brother, he said, as far as thy hand has the means, but not from the things that have been taken from the wrongdoer by litigation and strife. Now a certain great elder, who was about 60 years old, heard these things about the Blessed One, and wished to test him to see if he was easily persuaded by words, quickly scandalized, and lightly condemned others. He dwelt in the monastery of Abbathridin, but he went to Alexandria and proceeded to take up a manner of life which easily scandalized men, but easily was approved of by God, who granted to each man according to his heart, as David said. The prayers of our Holy Father, the Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy upon us. As soon as he entered the city, this man recorded all the known harlots in a register and began to work, earning a carat, a small coin equaling 1/24th of a numisma, each day. At sunset, he ate 1 farthing's worth of lupine, and then took the rest of his wage and entered the dwelling of one of the harlots, where he gave her the money and said, give me this night, and do not commit fornication. And so he remained near her all that night, guarding her that she not fornicate. From the early evening he took up his stand in a corner opposite the place where the woman was wont to sleep, and he chanted and prayed for her, making prostrations even until daybreak. On leaving, he made her swear that she tell absolutely no one of his deeds. But one of the harlots revealed him, that is, his manner of life, saying, he does not come to us so as to fornicate, but so as to save us. And the old man prayed, she became possessed with a demon, so that the rest would fear and not reveal him during his life. So men said to that demonized woman, see there, God has requited you because you lied. That miserable wretch goes to fornicate for no other reason. Thus the holy man Vitellius, for this was his name, wished to flee the glory of men and call forth souls from darkness. And he would say in the hearing of all, when at work his turn came and he received his meager wage, "Let's go, master. Madam so-and-so awaits you." And as many would jeer and mock him, he replied, "So what? Do I not have a body like everyone? Or is God wroth with monks only, that they should die of self-constraint? Sure, they are men like everyone else." And some will reply to him, "Take for yourself one woman a bond, change your garments, and have children, lest God on your account be blasphemed, and you bear the guilt of the souls who are scandalized by you." But he answered them with oaths, feigning anger, "As the Lord lives, I shall not listen to you. Depart from me. Now I have to do nothing else, so that I will not be scandalized, save to take a wife, and so to worry over a household, and live wretchedly. God forbid. He who wishes to be scandalized, let him be scandalized and break his head. What do you want with me? Has God made you judges of me? Away with you. Mind your own souls. You need make no defense for me. One is the judge in the holy day of judgment, even he who shall then requite every man according to his work. If God did not wish it, I would not have come to Alexandria." These things he said, making a great tumult, shouting, such that hereafter all tried to cover his mouth. And he also said, "Truly, if you do not give way, through me you will give way to your own harm." When some of the church officers have often heard these things from him, they reported to the Pope his affair. But God, who knew that the righteous Vitellius did not desire to offend him, hardened the heart of the Blessed John, and he believed nothing he was told, for by the experience with the aforementioned eunuch he was full of fear. But rather he cast out those who told him about Vitellius, rebuking them severely with these words, "Cease slandering the monks. Do you not know that it is recorded in the writings about St. Constantine the Emperor, that certain men who did not fear God began, after the completion of the Holy Council, to make slanderous accusations to the Blessed Emperor about one another, some being bishops, some monks? But Constantine, that true saint of God, assembled both parties, I mean the accused and the accusers, and caused the accuser to repeat the transgression before the face of the accused, though it was adultery, though murder, or worse still, whatever it was. When he discovered that many of these slanders were actually true, he remembered him that said, 'Who is weak and I am not weak?' And again, how the Lord did not condemn the woman who was apprehended at the very moment of adultery. And imitating this, he brought forth a lighted candle before all, I mean the accusers and the accused, burned all the reports which had been given him. And he said, 'In very truth, if with mine own eyes I saw a priest of God, or one robed in the angelic habit falling into sin, I would stretch out my royal garment and cover him, so that no one should see him.' Indeed, you have the same opinion about the eunuch, that servant of God, and you swept me up in it, and brought great condemnation upon my soul." Thus briefly shaming them, the Pope dismissed them. But God's servant Vitellius ceased not from his work, and he also besought God, even as he assured certain after his death in a vision, that sin be not reckoned to those who scandalized with him, because, he said, "That which I did could easily cause scandal. If a man has said something, he should not be judged on my account." Now his labor brought many of these women to compunction, when they saw him stretching out his hands all the night and praying for each one of the harlots. Therefore some of them stopped fornicating, while others moreover married husbands and lived chastely, and still others quit the world entirely and took up the monastic life. But until his repose, no one knew that it was because of his exhortations and prayers that these lewd women ceased from sin. One night, while he was coming forth from the dwelling of one of the chief of the harlots about dawn, a certain dissolute man encountered him as he was going in to sin with her, and as soon as he saw him, I mean here Vitellius, on his way out from the woman, that vile man gave him a blow, saying, "Miserable wretch, mocker of Christ, how long will you continue your ways?" But the saint replied, "Believe me, blighter, you shall receive such a blow that all Alexandria will gather at your cries." No long time after, the holy man Vitellius fell asleep in peace in his little cell, no one perceiving it. For he had a tiny cell at the gate called that of the Sun, where also he often held divine services in the nearby Church of the Holy Womb. Some of the harlots gathered there, saying, let's go, about Vitellius is having another service. When they would come, he would take great solicitude for them, both eating and playing with them. But this would often stir up certain men to a frenzy, who would say, they all love him, that pseudo of God. Go after him. But they did not know his hidden labor. Indeed, they beheld how he would enter all their dwellings, but they did not understand that he gallantly and chastely ran thither for their salvation. Now when he had fallen asleep, as was said, in his own cell, and no one knew it, straightway a demon in the appearance of a villainous blackamoor stood before the man who had given Abba Vitalis the blow. It said to him, "Take the blow which Abba Vitalis has sent you." And the man immediately fell down and began to foam with the mouth. And according to the prophecy of Abba Vitalis, nearly all Alexandria gathered because of the violence which he suffered from the demon, and especially because the sound of the blow was heard at nearly the distance of a bow shot. After a goodly time, the possessed man came to himself, and tore the garments upon his chest, running straightway to the cell of the saint, crying and saying, "I have sinned, O servant of God, Vitalis, forgive me." And those who heard him ran together, and as soon as they reached the cell of the saint, the demon rose up again and tore him. And those who had followed the man entered the cell. They found the saint kneeling and praying the Lord, having already given up his soul. And on the earthen floor they found the inscription, "Men of Alexandria, do not judge anything before the time when the Lord shall come." Then also the demon left that man, and they confessed what he had done to the saint and what he had said to him. All this was immediately reported to the Holy Patriarch John, and he came quickly with the clergy to the relics of the righteous Vitalis. And when he saw the inscription on the earth, he said, "Verily, with God's help, humble John has escaped this inscription, for I might have received that blow which this possessed man received." Thereupon all the harlots, and those of them who had abandoned the world, and those which had married husbands, took up wax tapers and oil lamps, went before his body weeping, and saying, "We have lost our salvation and our instruction." They explained to all his manner of life, and that it was not for some shameful deed that he came in unto us. We never saw him lying on his side, or drinking wine, or sleeping 2 hours in the night, or taking any of us by the hand. But some found fault with him and said, "And why did you not tell all of this, but allow the whole city to be scandalized?" They mentioned the affair of the woman who had become demonized, and said, "Fearing that this should also befall us, we kept silent." After he was buried with great honor, the man who was punished by him and healed remained to celebrate his days of commemoration, and thereafter became a monk in the monastery of Abba Teresa in Gaza, where he also received the cell of Abba Vitalis according to his faith, stay there till his death. Thus the most holy Patriarch John offered great thanksgiving to God, who would not allow him to sin against his servant Vitalis. And many men and women in Alexandria were greatly edified, and henceforth gave shelter to monks, and was strengthened not to lightly condemn any of them. The sacred sepulchre of St. Vitalis wrought healings after his death. By his prayers may the Lord grant us mercy and a good defense in that day when he shall make manifest the hidden things of men, and lay bare the intentions of heart. One day a man asked an alms of the Holy Patriarch, who directed that 10 coppers, and no more, should be given him. The beggar then violently abused the Patriarch to his face, for not having given him as much as he wanted. When his attendants were anxious to thrash the man for his insolence, the Pope rebuked them severely, saying, "Leave him alone, brothers. Here have I been insulting Christ for 60 years by my deeds. Can I not bear one insult from this fellow?" And he commanded his almoner to open the money bag, let the beggar take as large a sum as he wished. One day the All-Wise heard of a generous giver, so he sent to him privately and said, as it were in jest, "How is it you became so generous? Was it natural to you, or did you put constraint upon yourself?" Some to whom he would put the same question stood shamefacedly before him and would not give an answer, while others would then tell him their story. One man, in the same question, answered as follows: "As a fact, master, I neither give anything nor do any good, but the little I do give and do, from that which comes to me through Christ and your prayers, I came to do in this way. Formerly I was very hard-hearted and unsympathetic, but one day I lost money and was reduced to poverty. Then my reason began to say to me, 'Truly, if you had been charitable, God would not have forsaken you.' Thereupon I decided to give 5 coppers a day to the poor. When I started giving them, Satan immediately checked me, saying, 'Those coppers really have been enough to buy a bath ticket or vegetables for your family.' Then I felt at once as if I were taking money out of my children's mouth, so I gave nothing. But I noticed I was being mastered by this vice, so I said to my slave, I want you to steal 5 coppers daily without my noticing it, and give them in charity. For, master, I am a money changer. My slave, worthy fellow, began by stealing 10 coppers, and occasionally even a shilling. As he noticed that we were being blessed, he began to steal crowns too and give them away. One day I was expressing my astonishment at God's blessings to us, and I said to him, those 5 coppers, my boy, have greatly benefited us, so now I want you to give 10. At that, the slave said to me with a smile, yes, be thankful for my theft, since but for them we should not even have bread to eat today. However, if there can be a just thief, I am he. Then he told me that he had given shillings and even crowns. So it was through his faith, master, that I grew accustomed to giving with all my heart. The Holy Patriarch was much edified by the story and said, truly I have read many stories of the lives of the fathers, but I have never heard anything like this. One of the high officials bore a grudge against another. Great John heard of this and admonished him several times, but could not persuade him to be reconciled with his enemy. One day, therefore, the saint sent and had him fetched on the pretext of some public business, and as soon as he had come, the Patriarch held a service in his chapel, no one else being present save his chancellor. After the Patriarch had said the prayer and had pronounced the opening words of the Lord's Prayer, the 3 of them began to repeat the prayer. When they got to the sentence, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, the Patriarch made a sign to the chancellor to stop, and he himself stopped too, and the magistrate commenced saying all by himself the words, forgive us as we forgive. At once the saint turned towards him and said in a gentle voice, consider in what an awful moment you are saying to God, as I forgive, do thou also forgive me. Immediately, as though tormented by fire, the magistrate fell on his face, the saint's feet, crying, whatever you command, my Lord, your servant will do. From that time he was reconciled to his enemy in all sincerity. Then again, if the blessed man noticed that anyone was haughty, he did not reprove him to his face, but if he noticed him sitting in his reception room, he would introduce some talk about humility, in order that by such teaching he might gradually break the pride of the haughty man and chasten him by some such words as these. I am astonished, my masters, that my wretched soul does not remember the virtue of humility, which the Son of God manifested when he appeared on earth. But I am puffed up and exalt myself over my brother, for I am perhaps a little better looking, or richer, or more distinguished, or hold some public office, and I forget the divine voice which said, learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, ye shall find rest unto your souls. Nor do I reflect upon the words of the saints, of whom one calls himself dust and ashes, another a worm and no man, and yet another a stammerer and slow of speech. Isaiah, too, worthy to behold God, so far as a man may, declared then that he had unclean lips. For what am I, humble man as I am? Was I not fashioned from clay, just as a brick is? And will not all the glory which I think I have wither like the flower of the grass? With these and many more similar discourses, this wise man, while pretending to talk about himself, would cauterize the man, afflicted with haughtiness and self-conceit, and do good to his soul. For the patient understood that the Patriarch was referring indirectly to him. The blessed man always used to talk much about the thought of death and the departure of the soul, that on several occasions those who went in to him with a haughty bearing and laughing face and bold eyes came out from his presence with humble demeanor and a contrite face and eyes filled with tears. He used to say, my humble opinion is that it suffices for our salvation to meditate continually and seriously about death, and to think earnestly upon the fact that no one will pity us in that hour, nor will anyone travel with us out of this life, except our good deeds. When the angels come hastening down, what a tumult will the soul then be if it is found unready? How it will beg that it may be allowed a further short span of life, only to hear the words, what about the time you have lived? Have you spent it well? These were the teachings full of God's wisdom the blessed man gave to himself and to all. These were his daily thoughts and meditations. He also gave a great deal of thought to the Holy Liturgy and spent much care upon it. One day, when he determined to stop so many people from leaving the church as soon as the gospel had been read, to spend their time in idle talk instead of in prayer, what did he do? Directly after the gospel had been read in church, he slipped away and came out himself and sat down outside with the crowd. And when everyone was amazed, the just man said to them, Children, where the sheep are, there also the shepherd must be. Come inside, and I will come in. Stay here, and I will stay too. For I come down to the church for your sakes, so I could hold the service for myself in the bishop's house. After repeating the same action a few times, he sobered the people and greatly reformed their conduct in this matter, for they were afraid that the never-to-be forgotten patriarch might act in the same manner towards them as before. He also forbade anyone to make an appointment to meet in church, but in the presence of all, he would force any such to leave, saying, "If you really came here to pray, then occupy your mind and mouth with that. If you came merely to meet someone, it is written, the house of God should be called the house of prayer. Do not turn it into a den of thieves." Now, the really remarkable thing in the life of the saintly patriarch was this. Although he had not practiced the discipline of a monk, though he had not spent his time in church among the clergy, but had lived in lawful wedlock with his wife, despite the fact that he remained a layman until the hour when he was consecrated patriarch, yet he so mastered the ordering of the church and he attained to such a height of virtue that he expelled many of those who had distinguished themselves in the asceticism of the desert. As he wished to have a share in this good thing also, to be numbered among those who live the monastic life, he devised the following scheme. He collected 2 bodies of holy monks, arranged that all their needs should be supplied from the lands belonging to him in his native city, built cells for them, and appointed them to the 2 chapels, the one of Our Lady, the Mother of God, and the other of St John, which he had rebuilt from the foundations. Then he spoke to those monks beloved of God and said, "I myself, after God, will take thought for your bodily needs, but you must make the salvation of my soul your care, so that your evening and night vigils may be set to my credit with God. But if you celebrate the liturgy and ourselves, your own souls will gain the benefit." This he did, as he wanted to make the God-beloved monks very zealous. So his God-pleasing organization of these 2 bodies of monks was established, and through their means the life of the city under him was conducted almost after the fashion of a monastery, for hymns were sung to God continuously in various places throughout the night. Another thing the blessed man taught and insisted upon with all was never on any occasion whatsoever to associate with heretics, and above all, never to take the Holy Communion with them, even if, the blessed man said, you remain without communicating all your life, if through stress of circumstances you cannot find the community of the Catholic Church. But if, having legally married a wife in this world of the flesh, we are forbidden by God and by the law to desert her and be united to another woman, even though we might have to spend a long time separated from her in a distant country and shall incur punishment if we violate our vows, how then shall we, who have been joined to God through the Orthodox faith and the Catholic Church, as the Apostle says, I espouse you to one husband, that I might present you as a pure virgin to Christ, how shall we escape from sharing in that punishment which in the world become aways heretics, if we defile the Orthodox and holy faith by adulterous communion with heretics? For communion, he says, has been so called because he who has communion has things in common and agrees with those with whom he has communion. Therefore, I implore you earnestly, children, never to go near the oratories of the heretics in order to communicate there. Amongst his wonderful achievements, the blessed man attained unto this also, never to judge his neighbor without good reason, or to listen to those who condemned him. Here let me give a teaching on this point, from which all may profit. A young man eloped with a nun and fled to Constantinople. On hearing this, the just man almost died of grief. But some time later, when sitting in his sacristy with some of the clergy and enjoying a profitable conversation, someone happened to speak of the young man who had gone off with the nun. Those who were sitting with the saint began cursing the young man for having destroyed 2 souls, his own and the nun. But the blessed man interrupted and stopped him, saying, "No, my children, do not speak like that. For I can prove to you that you yourselves are committing 2 sins. One, because you are transgressing the commandment of him who said, Judge not, that ye be not judged. And the second, because you do not know for certain whether they are still living in sin and have not rather repented." But I read the life of a father which has the following story. In a certain city, 2 monks were starting on an errand, and as one of the 2 passed through a square, a harlot called out to him, "Save me, Father, as Christ saved the harlot." And he, without a thought of men's censure, said to her, "Follow me." And taking her by the hand, he went out of the city openly in full view of everyone. Thus the rumor spread that the Abba had taken the woman Porphyria, for that was her name, to wife. As the two traveled on, so that he might put her into a convent, the woman found the baby which had been exposed and was lying on the ground near a church, and took it with her, intending to bring it up. A year later, some of the citizens came to the country where the Abba and Porphyria, she who had been the harlot, was staying, and seeing her with the child, said to her, "You have certainly got a fine chick by the Abba," for she had not yet adopted the monastic habit. The men who had seen her spread abroad the report when they got back to Tyre, for that was the city from which the Abba had taken her, that Porphyria had had a fine son by the Abba. "We saw him with our own eyes," they said, "and he is very much like his father." Now, when the Abba knew beforehand by revelation from God that he would shortly die, he said to the nun Pelagia, for so he named her when he gave her the holy habit of a nun, "Let us go to Tyre, for I have visions there, and I want you to come with me." She did not like to refuse, so she followed him. They both came to Tyre with a boy who was now 7 years old. When the Abba fell ill with a mortal sickness, about 100 people from the city came to visit him, and he said to them, "Bring hot coals." When the censer arrived full of hot coals, he took it and poured all the hot coals on to his habit, and said, "Now be assured, brethren, that as God preserved the bush unburnt from the fire, and as the live coals have not even singed my garment, so too I have never committed sin with a woman from the day I was born." And all was struck dumb with amazement that his robe was not burnt by the fire. And they glorify God who has such servants, though they be unrecognized by men. From the example of the nun Pelagia, who had once been a harlot, several other harlots followed her, renounced the world, and went with her into her convent. For after the monk, the servant of the Lord, who had received her profession, had fully satisfied every one of his innocence, he surrendered his soul to the Lord in peace. For this reason, the Patriarch continued, "I warn you, my children, not to be so ready to mock at or judge the acts of other people. We have often seen the sin of the fornicator, but his repentance which he made in secret we did not see. And we may have seen someone steal. We know nothing of the groanings and tears which he has offered to God. We still think of him as we saw him, a thief, a fornicator, or a perjurer. But in the sight of God, his secret repentance and confession has been accepted, and in God's eyes he is honorable." Thus all were astonished at the teaching of this virtuous shepherd and teacher. Two clerics were shoemakers and worked near each other. The one had several children, a wife, and his father and mother, yet found time to attend church regularly. And it was he who, after God, supported them all by his handicraft. The other, in spite of being a more skillful workman, could not even support himself, because he found no time for church, at times working even on Sundays. Consequently, he was envious of his neighbor, and one day, unable to bear his jealousy any longer, he said to him angrily, "How is it you have grown so prosperous? For I pay more attention to my work than you do, yet I am losing money." The other, wishing to make him find time to go into church, said, "Whenever I go to church, I find a coin thrown on the ground. And thus, bit by bit, I have grown rich. Now, if you like, I will always give you a call. Then you come with me, and if we find anything, you should go halves with me." The other consented and accompanied him to church, and for that reason God blessed him continuously and enriched him. Then his good counsel said to him, "You see how much good one lie for the sake of God has done, both to your soul and to your finances. To tell you the truth, I never found anything in the shape of money lying on the ground as you thought. But since our Lord said, 'Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you,' therefore I can confidently take the plunge to see I did not fail. You have found, and found abundantly." When it reached the ears of the Holy Patriarch, he ordained the good counsel to the priesthood as he deserved, for he already was a reader. Here ends the narration of the very God-fearing Minas, whom I mentioned at the beginning of my work, he who had been treasurer of the most holy church of the metropolis of the Alexandrians. For the rest of the work, I, unworthy as I am myself responsible, though some of the stories have been told me by trustworthy informants. In one of the former chapters, I mentioned the strong bond of spiritual love which united our blessed Patriarch with the patrician Nikitas. And the present chapter will give sufficient proof of our happy relation which bound them to each other. When by God's permission, or rather because of our sins, Alexandria was on the point of being betrayed to the impious Persians, the shepherd, recalling our Lord's words, "When they drive you out of this city, flee into the next," was going to flee to his native country, Cyprus, where was a city in which he was born. So the patrician Nicetas, seizing upon this favorable opportunity, said to the holy man, I beseech you, if I have found grace in your sight, deign to take the trouble of traveling to the Queen of Cities, to grant to our most pious sovereigns your acceptable prayers. The Patriarch, yielding to his friend's great faith, agreed to his suggestion, for God wished to show his purpose and the great honor in which he held the Blessed Patriarch. While the boat on which the Patriarch and the patrician were traveling was continuously being battered by violent winds that seemed likely to be engulfed in the deep, the patrician, of whom I have spoken so many times, and the officers with him during the night when the storm took place, saw the Patriarch running round all parts of the ship with the poor people, and at times raising his hands to heaven together with them and bringing down help from on high. When continuing their course they had reached Rhodes, the saint whom God recalled saw with his waking eyes a eunuch in gleaming apparel, a golden scepter in his right hand, standing by him and saying, Come, I beg you, King of Kings is asking for you. Without delay, forthwith sent for the patrician Nicetas, and said to him with many tears, My master, you called me to go to our earthly king, but the heavenly king has anticipated you and has summoned to himself by humbleness. He then related to him the vision which he had just seen of the eunuch, or rather of the angel. The most glorious patrician heard his words with mixed sorrow and joy, but did not attempt to hinder the holy man, but after receiving richly of his holy prayers, and having treasured them up for the emperors with great respect, he encouraged him to return to Cyprus. As soon as he reached his own city of Amathus, he bade those who ministered to him to draw up his will with all speed. Quickly and without delay, they provided paper and pen, then its holy mouth bade them write thus, John, a slave, but free through the office of the priesthood, which was bestowed upon me by the grace of God, I thank thee, O God, for listening to me, a miserable sinner, when I begged thy goodness not to let me possess, when I died, more than one trimesian. Hereby I inform all men that the property of humble John has never amounted to more than this one coin. When by God's permission I was elected bishop of the most holy church of the metropolis of the Alexandrians, I found in the house of the bishop about 8,000 pounds of gold. And as my revenues from Christ-loving persons almost exceed human calculation, I pondered over the matter and recognized that all this money belongs to the Lord of all things. Therefore I took pains to render unto God the things that were God's. Now I have this one coin left, and as that too is God's, I direct that it too shall be given to those who are God's. Oh, what wonders are here, what kindness of heart there was in the saint. He did not cling to things as if his own when they were not his, as many prosperous people do, who hoard the gifts of God, or even wealth scraped together by injustice, as if they were their own treasures, and would still pass with them at death, and who never give generously to the needy. No, he always sought the things that abide forever, and are never spent, and for this reason he did not fail to win those true promises which bring to us God's assurance that I will glorify those that glorify me. And in truth, the Lord, who is ever being glorified by the saints' achievements, did indeed greatly glorify the saints. Again, this glorious man could not bear the thought that righteous and commendable achievements should come to an end with his brief life. So what did he do? He built from the foundations up hospitals for strangers, asylums for the old, and monasteries, and he gathered together companies of holy monks, and thus for the good works which are done therein, he has won a memorial of his righteousness which shall never pass away. Some men accomplish evil things, and leave after their death successors in this life to carry on their evil doings. And of these St. Paul says, some men's sins are evident, going before unto judgment, some men also they follow after. Just the contrary could be said of this blessed Patriarch John, namely, some men's just deeds are evident going on before unto the kingdom of heaven, some men also they follow after. And of these latter he was one. And that's what I say, it's not a fable or merely said in flattery, can be proved to us very clearly by the marvel that happened immediately after his venerable falling asleep. After he had yielded up and commended his soul to the hand of the Lord, as the scripture says, the souls of the righteous are in the hands of God, and commending it to him as a sacrifice free from blemish, his revered body was to be laid to rest reverently and with fitting ecclesiastical rites in the oratory of the wonder work of St. Tikhon. And then the following incredible sign took place. In the sarcophagus where the just man was to be laid, they already lay the truly holy bodies of two holy bishops who had died before him, and these, which had been lying there, I suppose, up to the time in a lifeless state, now accorded the saint as much honor as to the living. When the body of the most blessed Patriarch was about to be laid in company with those two saints, these shepherds who honored this arch-shepherd and respected and admired his great favor with God, moved aside their bodies, not so much of their own will, but rather at the command of God, just as if they were alive, took the saint between them. So these men, at God's bidding, showed honor as to a man honored of God, and at once made clear to all the glory and exceeding exaltation which in heaven had been awarded to him by God. This very great, most extraordinary miracle was seen not only by 1 or 10 or 100 witnesses, but by the whole crowd which had gathered for his honored funeral. Yet another more astonishing miracle I will now attempt to describe. He began it indeed while still living in the flesh, but completed it after he had been translated to the Lord. A certain woman belonging to the saint's native town heard that he had come from Rhodes, and that an angel had appeared to him there, and had told him of his call to our common master. She had on her conscience a very grievous sin, which she affirmed must on no account come to the ears of men. She cherished an unwavering faith in the saint, so she came speedily to him, and seizing hold of his feet, weeping bitterly, said to the holy man in secret, O Christ, blessed, I have alas committed a sin which must not come to men's ears, and I know that if you are willing, you can absolve me from it, for the Lord said about men such as you, whatsoever things he shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven, and whatsoever things he shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whosoever sins ye forgive, they are forgiven unto them, and whosoever sins ye retain, they are retained. When the saint heard the woman quote these words of the Lord, he was afraid that if he refused her request, he might be the cause of her suffering eternal punishment, while she could be free from sin by the confidence she had in him. So he said to her very humbly, Woman, if you really believe in God, that by my unworthy intercession he will forgive you the crime of which you speak, confess it to me. But she replied, Master, I cannot possibly say it. No man could endure to hear it. Thereupon the saint said to her, If you are ashamed to speak of it, go home and write it down, if you know how to write, and bring it to me. And again she replied, I really cannot, Master. And the saint kept silent a few minutes, and afterwards said, Cannot you write it down and seal it and bring it to me? To this she answered, Yes, Master, I will do that, and I implore your honored and angelic soul never to let my tablet be opened or found by anyone. After receiving the promise of the God-honored Patriarch that no one should open and read her tablet, she wrote down her sin with her own hand, and sealed it, and brought it to the blessed man. 5 days after the holy man had received the tablet, he journeyed home to God, without having mentioned or given instructions about the tablet to anyone. By chance, or rather by God's dispensation, the woman was not in town the day the Patriarch was translated in peace from this present life to the life beyond. In this case, too, God wished to show what favor the Patriarch had won with him through his loyal service. But the day after, when the time for his deposition of his venerable body had come, she returned, and on hearing of his death, immediately she became so distressed in mind as almost to be beside herself, thinking that the tablet she had given him had been left lying in the episcopal house, and that her sin would consequently become known to all. So she jumped up, regained in her soul her former unwavering confidence in the saint, and made her way to the coffin of the God-honored man. There, in utter desperation, she talked to him as if he were really still alive. O man of God, I was unable to recount my sin, and even to you, because it was so excessively grievous. Now, alas, it has perhaps been bruited and buzzed about everywhere. How I wish I had not disclosed the matter to you. Woe is me, for I hope to be relieved of my shame. And now I am shamed in the sight of all. Instead of healing, I incur disgrace. What need was there for me to disclose my soul's secret to you? However, I shall not grow weary, nor mistrust you, nor let my tears at your coffin cease, until I receive full satisfaction concerning my request. For, O holy man, you are not dead, but alive, for it is written, the righteous live forever. Then she would begin again and repeat the same words. I ask nothing from you, man of God, except satisfaction for my heart. What in the world has happened to the tablet I gave you? Then the God who once said to the woman of Canaan, My faith had saved thee, himself gave to this woman too full satisfaction. For after she had spent 3 days at the saint's tomb without touching any food or drink, and the third night, when she was again saying with tears the same harsh yet trusting words of the blessed saint, lo and behold, the servant of God came out of his tomb, plain to see, together with the two bishops who were buried with him, one standing on either side, and said to her, Woman, how long are you going to disturb those who are buried here, and not allow them to take their rest? To see our robes are wet through with tears. With these words he gave her her tablet with the seal unbroken, and said to her, Take it, you acknowledge it, open it, and look. And when she awoke from a vision, she saw those saints entering their resting place again, and herself holding her tablet. Then she examined it and saw the seal whole and untouched, and breaking it open, found that her own writing was blotted out, and beneath the place where her confession had stood written, these words were, For the sake of my servant John, your sin is blotted out. O friends and brethren, who can recount the mighty acts of our Lord, who is so merciful and generous as he, doing the will of those who fear him, glorifying those who glorify him, magnifying them by wondrous works. The prayers of our Holy Father, Lord. Not only in the actual spot where his blessed death took place was God's well-known pleasure in the blessed Patriarch John made manifest, but in other far distant places. For on the same day this blessed man took his departure from this life to go to his Lord, one of those who have practiced the angelic way of life and follow the monastic discipline, an admirable and virtuous man named Sabinus, living in Alexandria, fell as it were into an ecstasy and saw John, honored of God, come out of his own palace with all the clergy, bearing candles and going to the king. As he said, a eunuch chamberlain had summoned him. And Sabinus also saw a virgin bright as the sun. When John passed beyond the gateway of his palace, which signified his departure from his body, she welcomed him and took him by the hand, and on his head she had placed a crown of olive. From this, the holy Sabinus at once realized that the Pope's departure to his Lord had taken place at that very hour. He and his friends noted down the month and the day. It was the feast day of the victorious St. Enos. And when some folk arrived from Cyprus, those living in Alexandria asked about the saint's translation, and found that the vision was true, as it had come at the very hour in which the blessed man died. The sign of the Virgin holding his hand was a special confirmation. For, as we said in the introduction to his life, the saint had received a promise from her, If you gain me for a friend, I will introduce you to the king. And this promise she faithfully fulfilled. From other signs, too, all received the assurance that his charity and his compassion for the needy had brought him into the kingdom of heaven. For instance, another God-fearing inhabitant of the city of Alexandria saw, the same night as Sabinus had his vision, all the poor and orphans and widows carrying olive branches and escorting the patriarch on his way to church. There are not only 2, 4, 10, or 100 proofs of this. They are so abundant that we know for a certainty that the glorious patriarch is deemed worthy to be enrolled among the saints. And there is yet another fact that proves it even more clearly. Some considerable time after the holy man's falling asleep, the yearly service of psalmody was being held in the church of St. Titan, of whom I previously spoken, where the revered body of the most blessed Patriarch John was laid to rest. It was a solemn all-night service of psalmody held yearly in remembrance of St. Titan the Wonder-worker, and the Lord of Marvels, wishing to show to all men the great honor in which he held his servant John, granted that a healing perfume of myrrh should issue from his revered relics, which all present enjoyed glad heart. He gave glory to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, our true God, who glorifies the saints with unending glory. And let not any one of you, my Christ-loving readers, refuse to believe this great miracle, for even to the present day, in this Christ-loving island of the Cyprians, this wonderful grace of God can be seen at work in the bodies of various saints. For as if from springs the sweet perfume of myrrh issues from their revered relics to the glory of God's goodness, to the honor of the saints, and to awaken in us the afterborn and eager desire and a holy honor, that by modeling our lives in imitation of these saints, we also may be judged worthy of the same honors by the just God, the rewarder. So let us also, beloved, strive to imitate the achievements which I have described of this our Holy Father John, and since we are strangers and pilgrims in this life, let us lay up treasures for the life to come by giving generously to those in need. But according to the divine apostle, he that soweth with blessings shall reap also with blessings. Instead of corruptible things, the incorruptible; instead of the temporal, the eternal; instead of things felt and seen, things which eye saw not, and ear heard not, which entered not into the heart of man, the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. May it be granted to us all to attain these things by the grace and loving kindness of our Lord Jesus Christ, whom together with the Father and the Holy Spirit, the glory, honor, and power, now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen.